Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the dark, drafty corridors of a medieval castle. You're trudging through torchlit stone hallways, boots squishing in something you'd rather not identify, the distant howl of wolves carried in on a cold wind through the arrow slits. Your breath fogs up in the damp air as you jingle, yes, jingle, with every step. Why? Because you're wearing a floppy, three-pronged hat stitched with tiny bells, and this, somehow, is your job. You're the entertainment, the jester, the fool, and you probably won't survive this, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're listening from. And what time it is right now. Always curious how many of you are drifting off around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you learn as a medieval court jester is that laughter is mandatory. For everyone but you. The castle smells like wet wool, garlic breath, and chamber pots, and the minute you walk into the great hall, all eyes are on you, not with admiration, but with hungry curiosity, like they're trying to decide whether to laugh or throw a goblet. You shuffle forward, your bells jingling with every miserable movement. Those bells? They're not for flair. They're basically medieval GPS tracking. Your boss, the king, wants to know where you are at all times. You are not an artist. You are not a guest. You are not even an employee. You are a tool. A possession, and tonight, like every night, your only job is to be funny. Hilariously, knee-slappingly, throat-rattlingly funny. Which is a big ask considering the audience is a half-drunk feudal lord who once had a minstrel flogged for singing off-key. You force a grin. You dance a little jig. You trip on purpose and fall face-first into a basket of onions. Laughter erupts. Not because it's funny, but because you are the joke. You try not to breathe in too deeply, the hay covering the stone floor is soaked with spilled mead and something vaguely fishy. Probably herrings. Maybe rats. Being a jester means leaning hard into physical comedy. Think pratfalls, banana peel energy, but without the banana or the sanitation. You've trained your body to bend, jump, twist, anything to keep the howling masses amused. Because once they're not, your life becomes infinitely worse. Mainstream history tells us the jester was a cherished icon of courtly life. Someone who could speak truth to power while making the king chuckle over a leg of roasted swan. That version? Sanitized. The real thing. You're lucky if the swan isn't thrown at your head mid-routine, and let's talk about that costume. The iconic motley you're forced to wear is made from leftover fabric scraps in mismatched colors. It's itchy. It smells like fermented goat milk. It's probably crawling with lice. And every time you walk, those bells remind everyone that the fool is here. Again. Still not dead, historians still argue whether jesters were ever truly respected or just tolerated until the next hanging. There's evidence some jesters, like the legendary Will Sommers under Henry VIII, were granted some privileges, but even then, it was more pet dog who knows tricks than valued member of the cabinet. You're not just there to tell jokes. You're also the emotional sponge for the entire court. Bad harvest? Blame the jester. King's in a bad mood? You'd better make him laugh, or he might test out that new catapult design on you. And speaking of emotional sponging, the jester often bore the brunt of ritual humiliation. In some courts, if a noble did something shameful, the jester had to reenact it for laughs. Imagine slipping on spilled stew, and the next day a guy in a floppy hat is imitating your fall, except with fart noises, a chicken puppet, and twice the mockery. That's your revenge. Unless the noble takes it personally. In which case, enjoy sleeping in the stables tonight. Quirkier still, some jesters had to double as messengers. Yep, between the insults and juggling acts, you might be handed a scroll and told, take this to Lord Bramblebutt, and make it rhyme. If you flub the verse, or deliver it with the wrong tone. Off with your head. Literally, even your name isn't your own. They call you Picklefoot, or Flibber, or Guff the Goose. And heaven help you if you ask to be called, say, Gerald. Nobles don't want to laugh at Gerald. They want to laugh at someone who sounds like a rejected Muppet. Back in the great hall, the air is thick with roasting meat, body odor, and candle smoke. A noblewoman giggles as you roll past her in a barrel, and someone from the shadows yells, "Do the pig impression again." So you oink. And snort. And wiggle. Inside, something dies a little. But you oink louder, because you're still breathing, and that's the only metric of success. There's one part of your routine everyone waits for. It's called the leap. You balance on a chair, then on a table, then launch into the air with a spin. It's part acrobatics, part prayer. If you land it, you might get an extra scrap of venison. If you don't, well, you won't have to perform tomorrow, because your ankle's gone sideways and your spleen's leaking. The king claps. He's in a good mood tonight. That's good. It means you can eat. Maybe not with them, but you'll get the dregs of the banquet, bones, crusts, and whatever the dog didn't finish. Better than last week when the cook gave you a turnip boiled in vinegar and told you it was a fool's feast. Out in the hallway, the guard gives you a look. Not pity. Just acknowledgement. Like a fellow prisoner. You jingle past him and return to your tiny cot next to the scullery. The walls weep moisture. Your pillow is a rolled-up apron. You pull the thin blanket over your bell-laced feet and try not to think about the fleas. Outside, the wind howls again. Somewhere, an owl hoots. You close your eyes, exhausted and sore. And tomorrow? You do it all over again, because in this world, you're not a man. You're the punchline. You don't get to become a court jester. You survive into it. It's not a role you apply for like a merchant or a mason. It's more of a grim inheritance, a trial by humiliation, a joke that becomes self-aware. And before you ever dare to call yourself the fool with any sense of authority, you have to go through something resembling an audition. But it's no stage show. There are no headshots to submit, no charming resume filled with witty accolades and tumbling awards. Your audience is not a cheerful panel of casting directors. Instead, it's a panel made up of one impatient and easily bored monarch, 3 bloated courtiers who chew more than they listen, and a goose that may represent some forgotten allegory or may simply belong to the kitchen boy who lost it during breakfast prep. These so-called auditions, if you can even dignify them with that term, feel more like ritualistic hazing ceremonies wrapped in the flimsiest excuse for tradition. You show up at the castle gates with your boots caked in dried mud, your breath fogging in the bitter morning air. Maybe you've got a battered lute strapped to your back, or a few juggling balls with the stuffing nearly gone, tucked deep in your satchel. Either way, you're greeted with narrowed eyes and a raised brow, the kind of reception normally reserved for tax collectors, wandering charlatans, and people who look like they might spread plague. Before long, you're shoved straight into the metaphorical lion's den. No pleasantries. No explanations. Just a room full of half-drunk nobles eager for amusement, yet none of them remotely inclined to laugh. They want to be entertained, but they're already convinced you're not up to the task. You are not asked to perform. You are instructed to. It's a command, not a request. Right then and there. With no warning. No script to lean on, no chance to rehearse even a line. You stand before people licking goose grease off their fingers, people who decide in a single moment whether your voice is charmingly quirky or intolerably grating. You have about a minute to slip, tumble, sing, mock, or improvise in a way that sparks delight. Fail, and you're not just rejected. You're tossed aside, or worse, thrown in the moat, strapped into the stocks, or locked away in that unsettling dungeon filled with rats that seem far too comfortable around people. of course, the versions of these tryouts that survive in mainstream history tend to be bleached of their cruelty. The sanitized tales suggest that perhaps you charmed your way into court with a clever limerick or a harmless somersault. 1 minute, you're reciting verses, the next, you're crowned the official royal fun-bringer. It's quaint. It's adorable. It's also completely false. In the real world, your trial might involve mock public whippings designed not just to test your endurance, but to see if you can keep the king laughing while pretending not to scream. Can you deliver a punchline while pretending to be hanged? Can you insult a baron and make him chuckle instead of order your immediate disembowelment? No. Then step aside. The next idiot is already stretching. One infamous account survives in a dusty court record. A would-be fool was challenged to insult every member of the royal family using original rhyming verse. He wasn't allowed to repeat lines. He ran out of material before reaching the youngest cousin, stumbled for a rhyme, and was immediately beaten with a leg of lamb. Not a cooked one, either. Raw. Solid. Icy from the cellar. The kind of weapon that leaves bruises shaped like the future. Then, of course, there's the infamous gallows test. Believe it or not, some courts truly arranged these. They staged a fake hanging as part of the recruitment process. They bound you, blindfolded you, hoisted you into the air with a noose around your neck, then dropped you just in time to avoid strangulation. As you gasped for air and trembled, the lords and ladies burst into peals of laughter. "Oh look," one of them might exclaim, daintily sipping from a gilded goblet, "he wet himself." And there you were, humiliated and traumatized. But you passed. Congratulations. You got the job. Don't expect a bonus. Scholars still argue whether these ghastly trials were widespread or rare outliers. But all evidence points to a single, inescapable truth: success had little to do with talent. It was all about timing. You had to know exactly when to fake a seizure, when to imitate the bishop's lisp, when to squawk like that wretched goose. It wasn't just about being funny. It was about being funny while dodging rotten fruit and avoiding permanent injury. Sometimes, existing court fools were expected to choose their own replacements. If you were growing too stiff in the joints, too slow in the wit, or just too depressing to keep around, your lord might drag in a few local oddballs and say, "Pick one who might survive the winter." And you did. You chose the lad who could balance a dagger on his nose. Or the girl who mimicked the bishop without drawing lightning. It wasn't a legacy. It was a lifeboat. But don't think that meant you got to leave. Oh no. Retirement just meant less tumbling and more heckling from a corner. There were other ways into the role, too. Some fools were inherited like old swords or scandalous diaries. "This is Mumblegrin," a noble might proclaim, slapping your back. He made grandfather laugh while the old man was dying. That statement could be a compliment or a dark omen. Possibly both at once. Other jesters arrived as war prizes. You conquer a village, discover someone with too many limbs moving at odd angles, and toss them in the cart with the stolen livestock. Later, you sort them into categories: edible, useful, and potentially hilarious. If they happen to resemble the symbolic goose when they scream, you've got yourself a new court fool. Occasionally, your trial wasn't even held before royalty. It was held by the other fools. Yes, there were others. Not many, but enough to form their own miserable, half-mad guild. These veterans were territorial and mean-spirited. You thought jesters were jolly? Think again. They were jaded, battered survivors who'd been laughed at and bled out more times than they could count. They hated fresh blood. So they tested you. Buckets of slop above your doorway, pig guts in your mattress, sour wine swapped for your morning broth. And you couldn't fight back. You hadn't earned that right. Your only weapon was wit, louder and faster than theirs. It was a kind of twisted boot camp, but with more falling anvils and fewer baths. a peculiar manuscript from the 14th century describes something called the trial of the laughless. In this rite, jester candidates were subjected to an entire evening of derision, mockery, and taunting from the court. The rules were simple: don't laugh, don't smile, don't speak. Break once, and you're out. The last one standing in grim silence won the honor of the bells. If you could survive the cruelty of laughter aimed at you without flinching, you might just survive the cruelty of laughter expected from you. After all the bruises, all the pretend executions and bizarre improvisations, someone decides your fate. You're either chosen, or you're escorted out. And no, they don't open the front door. Some great halls were designed with trapdoors built into the floor. Make the wrong joke, and down you go, straight into the refuse pit, landing in a soup of turnip peels, stale meat and your own crushed dignity. If you're lucky, you climb out. If not, the goose gets a new roommate. Let's say, somehow, you survive the process. You get picked. There's no announcement. No ceremony. Someone tosses you a jingling hat with bells on it, half mildewed, and says flatly, "Put it on. You're on tonight." That's it. No training, no schedule, no welcome feast. Just the sinking realization that if you're not significantly funnier by breakfast, there's a rain barrel behind the kitchen with just enough room for one more fool. From this moment on, your job is to publicly unravel in ever more creative ways. Daily. Painfully. You're now the king's licensed stress outlet. A punching bag with punchlines, yet, amid the madness, you begin to settle into a rhythm. A chaotic, cruel rhythm. You rise to catcalls, stumble through your act with barely enough rest, and land your first routine with a limp and a groan. A noble snorts. You count that as a win. You live to see another meal. Later that night, long after the lords have retired and the chambermaids snuff out the last of the candelabras, you find yourself alone in the kitchen. You steal a boiled egg, sit on a stool, and stare at the pewter tankard's warped reflection. Your painted smile has started to smear. You touch your face. It's still there. You're still the fool. Somehow, you made people forget their misery, if only for a moment, and in that sliver of solitude, as the candlelight flickers and your shin throbs beneath the table, you feel something dangerously close to pride. Almost. But then the bells on your hat jingle when you move, reminding everyone, and yourself, that you're not allowed to exist quietly. Just as your eyes begin to close, someone in the next room mutters, "Hey Jester, do that faceplant thing again tomorrow. That was priceless." You don't answer. You lie back on the straw, exhaling slowly. The bells jingle softly with every breath. The audition has ended. The performance will never stop. You wake up before the sun, because jesters don't get to sleep in, not unless they're dead or unusually sneaky. And you are neither. The straw mattress has left an outline of itchy welts across your back, your knees pop like twigs when you stretch, and there's still crusted stew in your hair from last night's surprise food fight. Guess who was the target? You rinse off with water so cold it qualifies as a form of torture in some regions. There's a single cracked mirror hanging by a bent nail near the kitchen hearth. You peer into it, adjusting your bells and motley. You look like someone who lost a bet with a sewing machine and a paint factory. A rooster clucks at you through the window. You're not sure if it's judging you or just naturally smug. Morning routines in the castle are like a cranky beehive. Servants are already rushing about, chamber pots are being emptied with disturbing sloshes, and cooks are yelling things like, "Where's the eel pudding? And who salted the sugar again?" The castle may look majestic from the outside, but behind the stone walls, it's chaos, grimy, frantic, wonderfully medieval chaos. You slip past a maid scrubbing a questionable stain and dodge a nobleman's spoiled child chasing a goose. You briefly wonder if it's the same goose from your audition. You nod respectfully. It hisses, your day doesn't really start until you're summoned. And that can happen anytime, anywhere. Breakfast. Mid-latrine. Doesn't matter. If the king wants a laugh while chewing boar jerky or sitting on his ivory-carved chamber chair, you jingle into the room, do a little dance, and hope you don't get hit by flying fruit. Again, mainstream history often paints kings as noble and wise. But you've seen King Aldrich II pick his nose with a turkey feather and order a duel over a spilled mug of ale. Your job is to make that guy laugh. Sometimes he's amused by your impressions of other nobles, especially ones he secretly hates. Sometimes he wants jokes about monks. Other times he just wants to see how many prunes you can stuff into your mouth before you cry, and that's the breakfast show. Your performances aren't scheduled. You're basically on call 24/7. A medieval laugh track without the dignity of a pause button. You might be juggling turnips in the courtyard one moment, then pantomiming a falcon with gas during a banquet the next. Your only consistent gigs are the meals. Feasts, to be exact. Which happen with horrifying frequency in this castle. Not because people are hungry, but because rich folks love excuses to eat goose and laugh at someone else's discomfort. Feast days are your Olympics. Imagine a room stuffed with fur-draped nobles, bored knights, and the occasional ambassador who doesn't speak your language but understands mockery just fine. The air is thick with roasted meats, spilled ale, and the unwashed confidence of the upper class. The minstrels play something vaguely melodic, but they know the real headliner is you. You wait behind the drapery, breathing deeply, the scent of pickled herring wafting through. Then someone yells, "Bring in the fool." And you're on. Spotlight, Medieval Edition. You flip into the room, do a somersault, you land sideways but make it part of the act, and jump straight into your routine, tonight. It's a sketch about the tax collector who tripped over his own ledgers. Big hit. You do voices. You mime. You accidentally toss a meat pie at Lord Bramblebutt's lap, he shrieks, the court howls, and the king wipes away tears of joy. You bow deeply, head spinning slightly from lack of lunch and too much movement. But the feast isn't over. No. Because it's not just about the laughs. It's also about spectacle. There's a reason the jester's routine was called entertainment, not comedy. You're expected to dance, sing, juggle, tell jokes, recite bawdy poems, but not too bawdy, or else, and, if the mood calls for it, wrestle a pig. Yes, a real pig. No, it's not trained. And yes, someone is definitely betting on whether it bites you again. There's a moment in every feast when the jester has to do something that isn't funny at all, but the court decides it's hilarious. Maybe it's reciting a dramatic poem while balancing on a barrel. Maybe it's eating something horrible, like the devil's custard, which contains horseradish, eel, and disappointment. Maybe it's just standing there while everyone pelts you with plum pits, calling it a game. Historians still argue whether these routines had ritualistic roots or were simply the twisted amusements of power-drunk aristocracy. The truth is probably both. Medieval courts weren't just seats of governance. They were pressure cookers of ego, ambition, and boredom. And boredom? That's where you come in. Between performances, you don't rest. You fetch things. You spy for your patron. You deliver secret notes with winks and rhymes. You play intermediary in domestic squabbles, reciting grievances in limerick form so nobody loses face. Sometimes you're even asked to predict the weather. Based on your innate foolish wisdom. Spoiler, it's always rain. By mid-afternoon, your feet ache, your voice cracks, and your bells feel like an alarm only you can hear. You sneak a crust of bread from the kitchen, chewing quietly in a corner while the cook pretends not to see you. He used to hate you, but after he saw you eat a boiled squirrel for a laugh, he softened. Now he sometimes slips you an apple. Friendship, medieval style. Some days you're summoned for private entertainment. Not like that, calm down. Usually, it's the queen or a visiting noble who wants something more refined. You don't do pratfalls here. You recite witty tales, impersonate famous poets, or make delicate jokes about clergy corruption. You wear a more subdued costume, still ridiculous, but less likely to blind someone with color clashes, and sometimes, just sometimes, you get a genuine chuckle. Not the forced court laugh. Not the drunk guffaw. A real, honest-to-goodness smile from someone who forgot, for a moment, that they're living in a damp castle full of political snakes and undercooked meat. One quirky tidbit from a 13th-century French court tells of a jester named Piffin who accidentally interrupted a royal chess match and spilled wine on the board. Instead of punishing him, the queen laughed, dubbed him Knight of the Clumsy Rook, and had a miniature banner made in his honor. He wore it on his hat until the day he slipped on a sausage and fell down a well. Still, a pretty good run. You won't get a banner. But maybe, just maybe, you'll get a warm roll tonight instead of the stale ones. As evening falls, the court thins. The king retires with a yawn and a satisfied burp. You jingle your way to the back hallway, dodging a dog that may or may not have fleas and definitely just licked your ankle. You sit on your cot, peel off your bells, and breathe. Today you made them laugh. Today, that was enough. There's a rumor, whispered among the scullery maids and scribes who know how to listen without being seen, that jesters don't sleep. That they just fold themselves up behind a tapestry until dawn, eyes open, grinning, waiting for someone to say, do something funny. You, unfortunately, do need sleep. You just rarely get it. Nights in the castle are restless for everyone, but especially for you. You're the nightcap act, the midnight confessor, the emergency entertainment when insomnia strikes the lord of the manor. Sometimes you're woken by the bell of a servant. His Grace can't sleep. He wants you to sing that song about the flatulent knight. It's your third time this week. You hum it softly while trying not to cry. But other nights, you're granted a rare stretch of uninterrupted darkness. Not quiet, there's always some guard snoring, a mouse scratching, the wind moaning through badly sealed arrow slits, but uninterrupted, which is a luxury. You lie on your straw mattress with a blanket that smells like boiled turnips and moths, and you think about the jokes that didn't land. The roast you dropped. The noble you accidentally insulted who now looks at you like you're a frog in his soup. You think about your past, though it blurs at the edges. You weren't always a jester. Maybe you were a shepherd's son, or a failed monk, or a pickpocket who told one too many jokes during a trial. Historians still argue whether most jesters were chosen for their talent, their deformities, or simply because they were nearby when someone needed a laugh. Eventually, the dark fades to gray. The castle creaks awake again, and you return to the grind of your duties, which now include playing the unofficial therapist for the kitchen staff. You're not trained in any actual counsel, of course, but people feel like they can talk to you. Maybe it's the hat. Marion the cook's assistant cries over her lost love. You nod, solemnly, while absent-mindedly juggling apples. A stable boy swears the blacksmith's apprentice cast a love spell on him. You do your best to reverse it by dancing in a circle and shouting nonsense in Latin. Does it work? No. Does he think it works? Absolutely. And that's what counts. Your usefulness extends beyond laughter. You are the court's pressure valve. The only one allowed to say the things everyone else is thinking, as long as you say them with enough flair. You can mock the king's gout, the queen's wigs, the bishop's questionable sermon, and live to tell the tale. Usually. Because everything you say is just a joke. Even when it isn't, that's the tightrope you walk. A long, wobbly rope strung over a pit full of offended nobles and political consequences. One false step, one joke too sharp, one impersonation too accurate, and you're done. Or worse, you're exiled. No applause. No ceremony. Just a boot and a locked gate. And your bells taken away. Ironically, the safer your jokes, the more boring you are. And a boring jester doesn't last. You're caught between survival and showmanship, a constant game of how far can I push this before someone orders my execution over dessert. Take Lord Halbridge, for instance. Fond of wine, sensitive about his hairline. You make a gentle jab, your lordship's wig gallops before you like a banner on horseback. Big laugh. The next day, he arranges for your shoes to be replaced with ones a size too small. You hobble for 2 days. You retaliate by replacing his ceremonial scepter with a sausage. Huge laugh. He never speaks to you again, but the queen chuckles every time she sees you. Worth it, but not all audiences are so forgiving. Some laugh out of obligation. Some laugh with knives behind their smiles. One noble woman throws you a coin every time you insult her husband. Another calls you a filthy gremlin in motley when you sneeze during her toast. You're both her favorite performer and least favorite person. A paradox in bells, and then, there are the visitors. Foreign dignitaries who've never seen a jester and are unsure whether you're entertainment or a court mascot. One German duke tries to pet you. A Roman envoy asks if you bite. You respond by barking and quoting Cicero with a lisp. The king loves it. The envoy does not. A quirky but true tidbit from an Italian court tells of a jester who performed an entire parody of the Pope during a visit from the cardinal. The cardinal was not amused. The jester vanished. Some say he ran off to join a monastery. Others say his remains were found years later beneath a very judgmental-looking statue. You take note, by midday, you're juggling eggs in the courtyard while pretending to be the local magistrate. A few knights laugh. One throws a copper coin. It lands in a puddle. You fish it out. Every coin counts. You save them in a little pouch hidden in your shoe. Why? Because you never know. Maybe one day, you'll run away. Start a bakery. Own shoes that don't squeak when you sneak, afternoons blur. More errands, more pranks, more impromptu limericks. A noble's dog refuses to eat. You're called in to cheer it up. A guest complains the wine is too sour. You deliver it next time while pulling a face like you've been poisoned. You're laughed at, but you solve problems, the jester's other, unofficial job title, and you listen. Oh, you listen, you hear secrets you're not supposed to. Who's plotting against whom? Who's sleeping where and with whom? You know who's in debt, who's cheating at cards, and which steward keeps hiding jam in the tapestry folds. You store these tidbits like weapons, wielded gently, but always there, just in case someone needs reminding that you may be a fool, but you're not stupid. That's your quiet power. You test it one evening. Lord Hensley, who once tried to have you whipped for mispronouncing his name, complains about the cold roast. You smile and mutter, colder than your mistress's feet. He chokes on his mead, splutters, and storms off. But he doesn't retaliate. Because he knows you know. And you know he knows you know. That night, you sleep a little easier, you dream of flying. Not with wings, but launched, catapulted from a siege engine, soaring over the castle like a striped, jingling meteor. The people below cheer. You land in a haystack. Not dead. Everyone claps. Then someone hands you a turnip. It's a weird dream, but when you wake, you smile. Because at least in that dream, you were free. There's something odd about your mornings lately. The castle feels twitchier. Like everyone's waiting for something, some announcement or disaster. People whisper more. Laughter's a little thinner, like bread stretched too far on a tray. Even your usual fans, the guards who chuckle at your chicken impressions, aren't giving you much more than a grunt. You jingle into the great hall, boots echoing on the uneven flagstones, and find the king deep in thought. That alone is unusual. Normally he thinks with his mouth open and food present. But today he's drumming his fingers on the armrest, and when he calls for you, his voice lacks its usual pomp. "Fool," he says, "we have guests coming. Important ones." That's your cue to pretend shock. You widen your eyes and clutch your bells like pearls. "Your Majesty. Should I mop the moat? Pluck the geese? Scrub the tapestry with my tears?" He waves you off with a tired smile. Just be ready. Ready. You're always ready. That's the job. But the kind of guests that make the king serious? That's a different game, you find out soon enough. Ambassadors. From the neighboring kingdom. Nobles draped in silk like it's armor. They ride in with banners flying and horses fancier than your best meal. The castle shifts into performance mode, everything scrubbed, straightened, and threatened into perfection. Even the rats seem more disciplined. And you? You're suddenly in high demand. Because when kingdoms mingle, tension follows like a bad smell. No one wants a war to start over a misunderstood toast. So the jester becomes the sponge, soaking up awkwardness, deflecting insults with flair, making sure when someone snickers at the wrong time, it's your joke, not a diplomatic incident. Your performance that evening is tailored like a glove. Safe jabs, light impersonations, a humorous puppet show where the two kingdoms are portrayed by chickens who argue over a pile of breadcrumbs. Big laugh. Even the ambassadors chuckle, though one of them looks like he's wondering if it's a trap. One mainstream fact. Court jesters were often used as unofficial diplomats. Your jokes aren't just jokes, they're coded messages. You can float ideas, test reactions, even deliver royal opinions with a grin. Ah, but only a fool would suggest such a thing. And yet, the idea has been said aloud. It's deniable. Convenient, after your show, you're called aside, not by the king, but by his advisor, Lord Darren. Thin as a rope, eyes like a hawk that hasn't eaten in days, "You," he says, "are to be present at every meal this week." You nod, pretending it's an honor. It's not. It's exhausting. Each feast is a balancing act. Guests from another court mean new rules. Your usual gags might offend. That joke about the three-legged horse. Apparently a direct insult to their prince's riding accident. That time you dressed as a bishop and juggled loaves. Offended 3 of them, and one spilled his soup in protest. Historians still argue whether jesters were truly untouchable in court hierarchy. Some accounts say yes, they had license to speak freely. Others insist that when politics got heated, the jester was always the first to burn. You keep that in mind, you adapt. You memorize family crests, listen in on conversations, watch body language. You become part performer, part spy. At dinner, you notice which ambassador reaches for his knife when a toast goes wrong. You file that away. You imitate the king of elsewhere's twitchy eye without naming him. Everyone laughs. You glance at the ambassador's face, half amusement, half "was that about me?" Probably, one evening, after your performance, you're summoned to a private chamber. That's never good. You know too well that private usually means someone wants you to do something very public later. But it's not the king. It's Lady Aramel, the queen's cousin, recently widowed, and rumored to have political ambitions. She offers you a seat and a slice of honey cake, which immediately makes you suspicious. Kindness is rarely free. She asks you a question: what do they think of us? You blink, mouth full of honey and nerves. She clarifies: the ambassadors. The nobles. Do they respect us? Or mock us behind our backs? You chew slower. This isn't a joke anymore. This is reconnaissance. And you? You're her informant, you tell her what you've seen, polite smiles, careful compliments, too many unfinished cups of wine. And one ambassador who asked if the queen's new gown was symbolic or just poorly dyed. Lady Aramel thanks you. Slips you a silver coin. You're now officially part of the information food chain. You leave wondering, was that honesty? Or betrayal? Back in your cot that night, you mull it over. Being a jester isn't just being funny. It's being useful. And sometimes that usefulness means knowing things. Saying things. Not saying things. There's a famous story, though quirky and probably exaggerated, of a jester named Neve who once diffused an entire war by bursting into a council room dressed as Death. He danced, collapsed dramatically, and whispered, "At least I don't tax the peasants." The council laughed so hard the treaty was signed out of sheer relief. Or so they say. You wonder if you could pull something like that off. Or if, more likely, you'd end up as a cautionary tale told by the next jester. You're tired. The castle's mood weighs on you. Even the jokes feel heavier. You long for a day without feasts, without politics, without people using laughter like a knife. You think about running. Not seriously, but the fantasy has its own flavor. A tavern in a distant village. No court. No bells. Just peace, but then you remember, you're good at this, it's not just about surviving. You know how to read a room, how to twist a joke into a shield, how to make someone laugh and think. That's power, strange and soft, but power all the same. The next day, you wake early, not because someone yells for you, but because you have an idea. You prepare a new act, subtle, clever, risky. You create tiny effigies of the two royal families, made from bits of bread and cured meat. During dinner, you perform a quiet puppet scene with the food, letting the king and queen argue over who gets the last pickle. The ambassadors nearly choke from laughter. The king claps. The queen looks startled, she hasn't laughed like that in weeks, but best of all, Lady Aramel catches your eye and nods. You said everything. And nothing. You wake up feeling oddly appreciated. It's disorienting. Like putting your foot into a boot and realizing it's full of warm honey. You're used to being tolerated, sometimes chuckled at, but respected. That's a dangerous feeling for a jester. The higher you rise in court favor, the steeper the drop. And your landing spot? Probably in the moat. Still, for now, you're riding a weird little wave of admiration. People nod when you pass. A few servants call you by name, not just fool. Even the steward, who once tried to exile you for rhyming taxes with backside, tells you the bread delivery is running late, just in case you want to work it into your act. You joke, sure. But people are listening. And worse, they're starting to think you know things. Maybe you do. Or maybe you're just very, very good at pretending, which is why, naturally, you get summoned to the Queen's solar. It's never ideal when someone with actual power asks to see you privately. You always imagine a trapdoor beneath the floorboards, or an assassin lurking behind the drapes, ready to strike the moment you make a joke about the wrong cousin, but the Queen isn't angry. She's just tense. Like a cat stuck in a harp. She's flanked by two ladies-in-waiting who look like they'd slap you with a fan if you sneeze too loud. "Fool," she says, "you've been observing our guests." It's not a question. You nod anyway. You are, in fact, very observant. Like the way Ambassador Trenforth scratches his ear every time someone mentions wheat tariffs. Or how Lady Sabelle hasn't worn mourning colors since her husband's accidental archery incident. The Queen wants your opinion. On politics. On people. On loyalty. That last one makes your stomach do a little cartwheel. She leans forward. Whom do you trust least? It's a trap. It has to be. You stall by making a joke. "My boots, your majesty. They whisper rumors about me at night." The ladies in waiting don't laugh, but the queen snorts. Just a bit. You relax a fraction, she waves a hand. If you think of anything relevant, let me know. You nod and back out, bowing awkwardly. On your way out, you spot something you weren't supposed to, a small scroll, left on her desk, marked with a seal from a neighboring kingdom. No one sees you glance, but you do. Historians still argue whether jesters were deliberately kept in the loop or just good at inserting themselves into it. Either way, you're loop adjacent now. Word spreads that your latest performance delighted the court. And suddenly, everyone wants your attention. Nobles invite you to private dinners, ask for personalized rhymes, hint at scandals you're supposed to make fun of, publicly, of course. You're the designated outlet for grievances. If someone insults a duke through your joke, and the duke laughs, then it's just good fun. If he doesn't laugh, well, you're expendable. That night, you perform at a private banquet. The wine flows, and so do the secrets. You sing a little ditty about a night with 2 lovers and 1 wig. People cackle. The knight's face turns red, but he laughs too, nervously. Later, he pulls you aside and whispers, "Don't do that again." You nod. But the smile you flash as you leave says, "Maybe I will." You've become more than entertainment. You're a tool. Not in the insult sense, though yes, also that, but in the utility sense. A weapon. A buffer. A distraction. Your laughter greases wheels and cushions blows, and yet, you're still a joke. Your freedom to speak comes with chains, invisible, jingling ones. You can say what others can't. As long as they're amused. The second they aren't, you're nothing. You hear rumors. Quiet ones. That someone is plotting. That someone else knows. That perhaps the next alliance won't come from marriage, but from removal. Political assassination in a kingdom this tense isn't rare, it's expected. Everyone's pretending everything's fine while sharpening daggers under the table. You become the unspoken messenger. Nobles ask if you've heard the one about the poisoned pear. You haven't. But now you know someone wants you to. You repeat the joke at court. Carefully. No names. Just hints. A pear, a betrayal, a very unfortunate digestive ending. The laughter is uneven. Some people chuckle. Some look like they've swallowed their tongues. Later, Lord Darren, the advisor with hawk eyes, summons you. You're meddling, he says flatly. I'm jesting, you reply, just as flat. He doesn't blink. Know the difference. Quirky historical tidbit time. In the 14th century, a jester named Roland was accused of tampering with royal morale after reciting a poem that too closely resembled the king's actual affairs. The punishment? A staged duel with a chicken. He lost. It was symbolic, somehow. You assume Roland didn't recover his dignity. Or the chicken, you decide to walk carefully. But walking carefully in a castle full of paranoia is like doing acrobatics on a pond made of beeswax. It's only a matter of time before you fall through, and then it happens. You're mid-performance, doing an impression of the foreign ambassador. It's spot on, the stiff posture, the pompous nasal voice, the habit of rolling his eyes when anyone mentions trade agreements, big laugh, too big, because the ambassador himself walks in halfway through, the room goes silent. The nobles freeze. You do, too. Your arms are still mid-flail. The wooden chicken prop is dangling from your belt like a guillotine's blade. He watches. Then speaks, amusing. But his tone is cold. Calculated. The kind of voice that says, "I'll laugh now, but later you'll find a frog in your soup." A live one. You finish your set with a much safer joke about candle wax and monks. It dies quietly. Later, you find a gift left in your quarters. A silver mask, polished to a mirror finish. No note. Just the object. You don't sleep that night. Masks mean something in their kingdom. Duality. Secrecy. Performance. It's not a gift. It's a reminder, they see you. You are watched. The next morning, the queen sends for you again. She's heard about the performance. She asks if it was deliberate. You reply, only the part with the chicken. She doesn't laugh. You're walking a dangerous line, she says. You nod. That's your job. You leave the solar with the mask tucked into your cloak. As you pass a window, you catch your reflection. For a moment, you imagine putting the mask on. Being someone else. Somewhere else, but then, from the courtyard, someone shouts, "Fool! The stew's on fire." You sigh. Back to work. Morning hits differently when you're in political hot water. The castle's sunlight, usually a warm nudge through the shutters, now glares through the stained glass like a disappointed relative. Even the sun, it seems, has heard about the ambassador incident and has taken it upon itself to silently judge you, flooding your chamber with accusatory golden light that says, "Reflect on your choices." You do not. Reflecting sounds like a luxury for people who aren't currently wondering whether the silver mask on their shelf is a threat, a warning, or, heaven help you, a very avant-garde party invitation. Your breakfast is no better. Half a heel of bread that tastes like it lost its will to live last week. And something you think was once cheese but now feels more philosophical than edible. You're halfway through debating whether the mold is sentient when you hear footsteps. Heavy. Measured. Not your usual grumpy duo of guards, either. These ones are tall, polished, and have the stiff-shouldered energy of men who've memorized the phrase on the king's orders far too well. Their expressions suggest they've arrested people for things like breathing irregularly or looking smug in public. They don't say a word, just gesture. You rise, brush crumbs from your sleeves, and follow them down the hallway and up the spiraling stairs of the North Tower. Each step feels like it might be your last. Somewhere between the second and third landing, your imagination starts writing a eulogy for your jester career. It involves a dramatic tumble off the battlements, a final jingle of your bells on the wind, and someone muttering, "Well, he died how he lived, inconveniently." But when you reach the top, there's no executioner. No rope. No final audience of stone-faced nobles. Just Lord Darren, standing by a long table cluttered with scrolls, wax seals, bottles of ink, a cracked hourglass steadily spilling its last grains of time, and a map heavy with scribbled notes and tiny, ominous flags. He gestures you forward without a word. You comply, but you're already sweating through your motley. He taps a particular cluster of symbols on the map. "Do you know what this is?" He asks. You squint. It resembles a drunk chicken attempting interpretive dance in a storm. A drunk chicken trying to dance. You offer. Darren does not laugh. Not even a twitch. "It's a contested valley," he says. "Both kingdoms claim it. Tensions are rising." You nod slowly, resisting the urge to ask why you're being brought into what is clearly cartography, the high-stakes edition. You're a jester, not a diplomat. You juggle turnips. You make fart jokes for coin. This is clearly above your pay grade. Tomorrow, Darren continues, a formal envoy will arrive to negotiate trade and border rights. They'll be tense. Suspicious. Every word matters. You blink, struggling to keep up. And I'm there to deliver maps via interpretive dance. He doesn't roll his eyes, but you can feel the effort it takes not to. No. You're there to read the room. And here's your mainstream fact for the day: jesters, believe it or not, weren't just comic relief. They were emotional barometers, court thermometers in funny hats. They cracked jokes at dangerous moments, poked verbal sticks at sensitive subjects, and observed who winced and who laughed. A kind of medieval psychological warfare, if warfare involved puns and pratfalls instead of swords and bloodshed. You try to protest. Something about how you once set your own sleeve on fire trying to tell a joke about firewood and timing. Darren cuts you off with a glance that could flatten cities. You've been useful, he says. Don't stop now. And so the next morning, you're scrubbed, combed, and awkwardly dressed in ceremonial motley that smells faintly of elderberries and stress. You're placed at the edge of the negotiation chamber like an accessory someone wasn't sure how to wear. No one explains your presence. Not to the guests, not to you. The envoys glance at you warily, confusion writ large on their furrowed brows. One of them leans over and mutters something suspiciously like diplomatic insult. The king shushes him with a single, unbothered wave. You try to breathe quietly. The bells on your hat disagree, the talks begin. They are, as predicted, tense. Every syllable lands like a chess move, slow, deliberate, and designed to provoke without breaking the board. The room is stiff with tension, the kind of atmosphere where even blinking feels like a risk. Someone brings up the valley. The temperature rises, if only by a degree. You make your move. You stumble forward in what looks like an unfortunate accident, dropping a scroll with performative horror. It skitters across the polished floor. Oh dear, you mutter, scrambling dramatically after it, not the map with the exploding sheep again. A choked snort. One of the envoys bites his lip, another tries to hide a grin. Exploding sheep. You nod solemnly, dusting off the parchment. Tragic tale. They thought the pasture was metaphorical. Turns out, so were the sheep. Laughter ripples through the chamber, not loud, but just enough. A crack in the facade. The kind of break that allows conversation to breathe again. Later, the king claps you on the back hard enough to shift your spine. Well done, fool. Your pride, surprisingly, survives mostly intact. Your shoulder. Less so. In the lower hall, you overhear the steward whispering to a servant, if the jester had sneezed during that speech, we might have lost the whole eastern border. You're unsure if it's compliment or panic-induced prophecy. Historians still argue whether jesters planned these moments or simply stumbled into them with chaotic brilliance. Royal agents of subversion, or accidental diplomats in floppy hats. No one can agree. You're not even sure yourself anymore. But people are watching now. Watching closely. That night, a noblewoman, someone whose name you barely know, grabs you in the corridor. Her face is pale, eyes sharp. She presses something into your hand, a ring. Small. Gold. A delicate engraving of an owl with wings outstretched. You recognize it. A family crest. Dangerous. Important. If anything happens to me, she whispers, give this to Lady Aramel. Then she's gone. Melts into the corridor like a silk-draped ghost. You stare at the ring. Your fingers tremble slightly. You shove it into your boot. And then you laugh, loud, unhinged, the kind of laugh that trembles on the edge of hysteria. Because it's either that or cry. The next day, news spreads, the noblewoman is ill. Suddenly. Suspiciously, you waste no time. You find Lady Aramel. Say nothing. Just press the ring into her hand. She examines it, quiet. The air is still. Then, finally, she nods, you're cleverer than you look. That's easy, you reply. I look like I fell out of a pie cart. She almost smiles, quirky tidbit for your growing collection. There's a legend about a jester in Burgundy who secretly carried messages for 3 rebel factions at the same time, and managed to survive by playing the fool so convincingly that no one suspected he understood a thing. You're beginning to think he was onto something. Over the next week, your act changes. You stop juggling for kitchen boys and start performing near council chambers. In the courtyard where secrets are traded with glances. By doorways where too many important people whisper too quietly. You become ambient commentary. An observant fool. The queen invites you to sit beside her during a tournament. She calls your wit refreshing. What she means is, you say what I can't. The ambassador invites you to dine privately. He smiles too widely. Laughs too eagerly. Asks if you've ever considered traveling. Perhaps, one day, to his court, you decline. Politely. He never brings it up again. But he watches you after that. Watches the way a cat might watch a particularly bold mouse, your neck deep in secrets. Swimming in them. Drowning, maybe, sleep evades you. You lie awake at night in your tiny chamber, bells still, breath shallow. Listening for footsteps. For the soft creak of your door. For chains, the silver mask remains on your shelf. It watches you too, in dreams, it speaks, you're one joke away from being useful, it says. Or one joke away from being dead. The strangest part. You don't disagree, but the curtain's up, and the show, as always, must go on. The bells on your cap have stopped jingling. Not because you've removed them, heavens, no. That would raise suspicion faster than a naked duke at a sermon. The bells are still there, still gleaming like the eyes of a cat that knows too much. But now, they remain quiet because you've learned how to silence them. Every step you take is measured, every motion calculated. You move with the careful grace of someone who knows how dangerous attention can be. A ghost in motley. A whisper in velvet slippers. You are the rarest of beasts, a fool who makes no sound. Of course, the show goes on. Outwardly, you're unchanged. You tumble into barrels, you yodel about the queen's fondness for pickled trout. You perform impromptu verses about knights who forget to untie their horses before charging into battle. You are, by all appearances, the same ridiculous creature they've always half admired, half dismissed, but behind the grease-paint smile, something else has taken root. You watch. You observe the shifting glances, the half-second hesitations, the tremble in a servant's hand as they pour wine for a noble who never drinks it. You've started to map the court not by territory, but by tension. Who laughs too hard at bad jokes? Who winces at certain names? Who always finds an excuse to leave early when the ambassador speaks? You are no longer merely the fool. You have become something more unsettling. Something with purpose, the court's most colorfully dressed intelligence officer, no one knows, of course. That's the point. You have mastered invisibility by being the loudest one in the room, but lately, something else has been stirring. A new figure has arrived, and he makes your skin itch with a warning you don't quite understand, Brother Aldrich. He's a monk. Young, painfully so. With the kind of clean-shaven chin and over-polished virtue that suggests someone who writes sermons in his sleep. His robe is simple, brown, rough-spun, but it carries the weight of ecclesiastical authority, stamped and sealed with holy wax and holier-than-thou intentions. He came with letters from the bishop. He brought others with him, all similarly solemn, all smelling of candle wax, old ink, and faint disapproval. He watches everything. Not the court. You, one evening in the great hall, you try your usual approach, gentle sarcasm and harmless blasphemy. A pun about monks and beeswax, something about wax seals and divine stickiness. He doesn't blink. He doesn't even acknowledge the attempt. His expression remains as unchanging as the stone saints above the chapel archway, and twice as judgmental. You get the impression he didn't come for prayer. A few nights later, you pass through the cloisters and catch his voice, low and urgent, echoing softly in conversation with the king's confessor. It's Latin, but you're not entirely ignorant. Your grasp of the language is weak, clumsy, and soaked in wine, but you catch enough. Vox stulti. Corruptio regni. The voice of the fool. The corruption of the realm. The words burrow under your skin like ice worms. You suddenly feel as if your bells have grown heavier. Historical footnote, by the late Middle Ages. Jesters were seen by many in the clergy as corrupting influences. Agents of disorder. Bearers of blasphemy wrapped in rhyme. A few councils even called for their penance or removal. Imagine confessing that you once juggled turnips during a funeral mass. You're starting to think Brother Aldrich wouldn't just approve of that history. He'd write a second draft with a bonfire. Then comes the banquet. It's one of those state affairs where everything sparkles and nobody breathes. The queen is present, her spine like tempered steel, her smile made of razors. The ambassador is all exaggerated civility and unspoken threats. Lord Darren clutches his goblet like a drowning man. And Aldrich, of course, is seated far too close to power for your comfort. They ask you to perform, you could play it safe. You could deliver the well-worn jokes that still earn polite laughter, the tale of the knight and the turkey, the saga of the chamber pot thief. You could be harmless, but something inside you has shifted. You've learned something, in all your watching. When a jester dances on the edge, the court listens harder. So you tell a story, it's technically a fable. Parable, really. You use animals, because animals are never treasonous. There's a lioness who rules the land, strong and silent. An owl who speaks in riddles by candlelight. A snake who drinks wine but eats nothing. And a goat, your favorite, who bleats, "Justice is for the soul," and refuses to sit during prayers. The court chuckles nervously. The discomfort bubbles beneath the surface, the queen's eyes narrow, ever so slightly. The ambassador holds his wine, untouched. And Brother Aldrich. He smiles. A small, restrained curve of the lips. It is not a comforting smile. Later that night, your chamber door creaks open. It's Lady Aramel. Her cloak is soaked through, rain clinging to the fabric like shadows. Her hands tremble as she passes you a sealed letter. Her voice is barely a whisper. "Burn this after reading." You nod. No questions, the letter is short. Shockingly so. But what it contains sends your stomach into freefall, a plot. Not of daggers or poison. No blood. Just whispered claims of sacrilege. Holy condemnation. They mean to depose the queen, not through blades, but through doctrine. A campaign of spiritual ruin. And the tool. The symbol of the queen's sin, you. The fool. The blasphemer. The noisy, gaudy embodiment of corruption. A painted face to pin the downfall on, you laugh. Loudly. Uncontrollably, not from amusement. From disbelief. You've spent your life being ridiculous, and now you're a weapon of political destruction. Historians still debate how effective such plots ever were. Some argue that religious pressure could undo a crown. Others say it was always just theater, morality as camouflage for ambition. But none of that matters now. Because you're in the script. And your role is already written. You burn the letter. You sit in silence. The silver mask on your shelf watches you with empty eyes. Next morning, the queen summons you. She says nothing at first. Just studies your face with the slow patience of someone rearranging chess pieces. Then she speaks, quiet and precise. "They're coming for me." You don't respond. "They'll use you," she says, and her voice holds no doubt. "They already are." You nod. "I've noticed." She leans back, fingers steepled, gaze sharp. "What will you do?" That's when you realize the terrible truth. You have a choice, a hollow one. A cruel one. One path leads to your execution as a heretic and traitor. The other? Slightly better decor. A more poetic inscription on your gravestone, but it's still a choice. "I'll keep jesting," you say. "It's what I'm good at." She nods once. Then be very, very funny, fool. That night, there's to be a performance. A command event. Word spreads like fire through dry reeds. Everyone will be there, you prepare in silence, you examine your reflection in your little warped mirror. Adjust your cap, your bells. You smear a streak of soot beneath one eye, like a shadow you mean to keep. Not flashy, but deliberate. Before you leave, you take the silver mask from the shelf, you don't put it on, you slip it into your pocket, just in case. The hall blazes with torchlight. The audience shimmers in silks and suspicion. Musicians drone in the corners, unnoticed. You step forward into the glow, bow low, and begin. Your tale tonight is about a parrot, bright feathers. Keen eye. Excellent mimic. It lives in a cage beside the throne. It listens. It speaks. It repeats. It watches. One day, the parrot speaks a truth too sharp. Too precise. The nobles panic. The bird is possessed. They cry. It must be purged. But the queen, wise and unshaken, orders otherwise. Give it a larger cage, she says. One with golden bars. And a mirror. Let it see what it speaks. Let it learn what power sounds like. The silence afterward is thick. Then, slowly, a laugh. Short. Awkward. Then another. And another. The room fills with uneasy amusement. The queen's mouth twitches, almost a smile. Brother Aldrich, he is no longer smiling. As the crowd begins to thin, a hand brushes yours, a note. Folded. Plain, 3 words, stay useful. Soon, you don't know who sent it. You're not sure you want to, you tuck it behind the silver mask. You lie in bed, awake, waiting for footsteps, waiting for chains, waiting for the next performance. It is barely dawn when you are jolted awake, not by the gentle hand of a servant or the fading echo of a dream, but by a sudden, reverberating bell tolling from the tower above. This is not a bell designed to rouse you for breakfast or signal a pleasant announcement. There is nothing cheerful about this sound. It carries the weight of catastrophe, the kind of heavy clang that rings out only when someone is already dead, or is about to be very soon. You sit up too quickly, and your head connects with the low-hanging rafter beam above your cot. A dull thud, followed by a sharp sting. Classic. When you touch your temple, your fingers come away slightly bloody. Wincing, you stumble into your tunic. Movements clumsy with sleep and pain. You grab the silver mask, worn more out of habit than necessity now, and move to the window. Smoke. Thick, black, unmistakable. It rises in heavy columns from the east wing of the castle. You narrow your eyes, trying to pinpoint the origin. The chapel. Of course, you mutter a word that is absolutely not permitted within the sacred walls of the building currently burning. By the time you arrive in the courtyard, breath short and heart pounding, the fire has already been extinguished. The immediate threat is over, but the destruction remains. It was a small fire, quickly contained thanks to the guards and the servants, but the damage is undeniable. The once proud wooden chapel doors are now splintered and hanging at odd angles. Soot clings to the stone walls. A trail of scorch marks leads toward the altar. Hymnals lie scattered and charred. One of the stained glass windows, once a jewel of holy artistry, is now fractured like a spiderweb, the colored shards catching the light like broken promises. A space meant for worship has been reduced to a blackened echo of itself. At the center of the commotion, Brother Aldrich stands, shouting with fervor. He is not addressing you. He is preaching to the gathering crowd, his voice loud and resolute, like divine wrath given human form. The tone of his words strikes like a hammer against the cold courtyard stone. It is not a discussion. It is a declaration. This, he booms, sweeping his arm toward the ruined chapel, is proof that sin has taken root in this court. You highly doubt he is referring to the undercooked pheasant served at last night's feast, and then comes the moment that makes your blood turn cold. From within the folds of his robe, Brother Aldrich produces a scrap of fabric. Torn, scorched, unmistakably red. The edges are singed. The cloth flutters slightly in the morning breeze like a warning banner. You know it the instant you see it, it is yours, a small piece, yes. But there is no mistaking the texture, the shade, the stitching. It came from your costume. The implication is clear: historical context. In medieval courts, assigning blame was practically a ritual. Fear, especially the fear of divine punishment or instability within the royal family, needed a face. Someone visual. Someone symbolic. Jesters, with their colorful garb and foreign manners, made for perfect scapegoats. Red cloth, in particular, was often linked with dangerous mirth or devilish influence. It didn't matter if you were guilty. What mattered was whether you looked like the embodiment of a guilty idea. You instinctively try to step back into the crowd, to shrink into anonymity. But it is already too late. Heads turn. Eyes lock on you. Whispers begin to ripple across the courtyard like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. One voice murmurs omen. Another follows with demonic influence. Your hands twitch at your sides, itching to protest, to shout that it was probably nothing more than a knocked-over candle or some clumsy acolyte's mistake. But you know how this works. Truth has very little value here. Drama, on the other hand, is priceless. Brother Aldrich does not name you directly. Not yet. But the seed has been sown in fertile, fearful ground. Later that day, you return to your chamber to find it disturbed. Not violently, not in a way that suggests rage or panic. But deliberately. Carefully. Every drawer has been opened. Your bedding has been turned over. Someone has searched, and searched thoroughly. The silver mask, oddly enough, is still exactly where you left it. But the note that was once hidden behind it is gone. You stand in the middle of the mess, your thoughts spinning like storm winds. The unease you have carried these past days blossoms into full realization. You are not just being watched anymore, you are being hunted. When the Queen summons you again, it is without fanfare. No entourage, no chamberlains. Just you and her, alone in her private rooms. Her silk robes are wrinkled, and her long hair hangs loose over her shoulders, unbraided. She looks exhausted in a way that only royalty can. Like her weariness has the power to sink ships or darken kingdoms. They're making their move, she says, voice quiet but taut with tension. You nod slowly. The chapel fire was their opening gambit. It's a performance, she replies, the corners of her mouth curling bitterly. And you, I'm afraid, are playing the role of the devil's understudy. You recognize the theatrical comparison and might have appreciated it under other circumstances. But your stomach flips unpleasantly. She pauses for a long beat, then continues, you'll need protection. You expect something dramatic. Secret guards, perhaps. A hidden dagger under your pillow. Poison vials or coded messages. Instead, she nods to a nearby page boy, who steps forward and places something warm and squirming into your arms, a puppy, a real one. Small. Floppy ears. An overload of enthusiasm. Its breath smells faintly of wet moss and old socks. You blink. Am I supposed to weaponize cuteness? He's the prince's hound, she explains, tone already shifting to brisk practicality. No one will question his presence. And oddly enough, she's right. Walking through the castle halls with a royal dog at your side changes everything. People look at you differently. Servants smile when you pass. Children wave with excitement. Even a few knights nod their heads politely in your direction. You are still the jester, certainly. But now, you are a jester with a noble, tail-wagging sidekick. And in court, perception is everything. Amusing footnote of the day, during the reign of Henry II of France, it is believed that a court jester once trained a parrot to imitate the Queen's voice. The bird accidentally insulted a cardinal. And it was the parrot, not the jester, who was put on trial. You often wonder how the bird's defense was mounted. Your new companion, whom you decide to name Pickle, quickly becomes your shield. Perhaps even your only ally who does not wish to see you removed from the narrative entirely, but Brother Aldrich is far from finished. He begins delivering sermons, not in the chapel, which still smells faintly of smoke and judgment, but in the great hall. The king, for reasons unknown, permits this shift. Perhaps he wishes to demonstrate piety. Perhaps he is simply too tired to argue and mumbles his consent through morning yawns. You attend one of these sermons. Only once. And almost immediately. You regret the decision. At first, it follows the expected script. Psalms. Prayers. A bit of fire and brimstone for theatrical effect. But then, the tone changes. The words sharpen. Aldrich begins to speak of jesters. Of the dangers of laughter that undermines divine order. Of those who mock the sanctity of creation. Of false joy that hides true corruption. He never once utters your name, but he does not need to. His descriptions are precise, down to the bells on your cap and the red of your sleeves. You stand at the very back, motionless, with Pickle curled faithfully at your feet. You force yourself not to sweat visibly. Historians have long debated the true role of religious factions in royal courts. Were figures like Aldrich true influencers, or mere ornamental pawns? You are starting to suspect the answer is not either or, but both. Or perhaps something more complex. A tangled web of robes, whispered secrets, and conveniently timed fires. That evening, you seek out Lady Aramel. She is pacing when you arrive, her steps sharp, her thoughts clearly already several moves ahead. I warned the Queen, she says without preamble. This isn't just about her anymore. They're coming for the court itself. They want reform. They want purity. They want a court free from what they call worldly distractions. You sigh. I am, unfortunately, a worldly distraction. She looks at you with something like affection, tinged with concern. You're also a threat. Because you see too much. You tell her about the sermons. The red fabric. The missing note. Her expression hardens like cooling metal. They'll need more than a burned rag to bring you down, she says firmly, and if they find something, then you make sure there's nothing to find. That night, you begin your purge. Anything remotely questionable is removed. The joke book filled with bawdy limericks. Discarded. The dice you carved from sheep knuckles. Thrown out the window into the garden. The silver mask. Hidden under a loose stone beneath the hearth. You even scrub under your bed, which, by your estimation, qualifies as a form of spiritual purification, and yet, sleep refuses to come. Pickle snores gently beside you, unaware of your turmoil. You lie on your back, staring at the ceiling and counting the wooden beams like sheep. Morning arrives with a knock. A messenger hands you a sealed letter. The contents are simple, but the message is chilling. Brother Aldrich wishes to meet with you. Privately. To discuss spiritual renewal. You glance at Pickle and scratch behind his ear. Well, this seems like a trap. Pickle releases a small, indelicate fart in reply. You take it as agreement. You stand before the heavy oak door of Brother Aldrich's chamber, the kind of door that seems to have devoured centuries of secrets and now looks as if it's preparing to swallow you whole. The ancient wood groans faintly in the silence, its surface etched with nicks and burns that speak of generations long gone. Your heart beats with a thundering intensity, like a drummer marching at the head of a royal parade, each pulse echoing in your ears like a warning. At your feet, Pickle sits faithfully, ever your reluctant guardian and companion in chaos. He looks up at you with that signature expression of his, half concern, half exasperation, as if to ask, honestly, how did we end up here again? You inhale deeply, drawing the musty scent of old stone and candle smoke into your lungs. You square your shoulders, straighten your bells with a practiced hand, and push the door open with a creak that sounds almost accusatory. Inside the chamber, there is no congregation of monks, no murmured prayers or rustling robes. Only Brother Aldrich waits, seated alone in the dim flicker of a single candle placed on a roughly hewn wooden table. The flame dances across the shadows like a restless spirit. His eyes meet yours immediately, sharper than you remember, assessing with the precision of a man accustomed to watching people more than speaking to them. They are cold, yes, but also worn. Heavy with something deeper than mere fatigue. It is the kind of tired that doesn't come from sleepless nights or fasting, but from playing a game so long and so quietly that no one even realizes it's still being played. He lifts a hand in a subtle gesture, wordlessly inviting you to sit. You do so, carefully lowering yourself into the chair across from him, trying not to trip over the ridiculous curl of your pointed shoes. You feel every inch the performer, yet something about the silence in this room makes your usual bravado feel paper-thin. So, he says, his voice low and deliberate, you've been quite the entertainment lately. You can't help the smirk tugging at your lips. I aim to please. But Aldrich doesn't smile. He watches you with the intensity of a man cataloging every twitch, every syllable. You're cleverer than most give you credit for. You see too much. Speak too freely. Your smile lingers, but your tone shifts. And yet, here I am. He leans forward, resting his elbows on the table. The candle casts shadows beneath his brow, making his face appear more carved than human. The queen fears for her crown. I, however, fear for the soul of this court. You nod slowly, absorbing the weight of those words. And I'm caught somewhere between a laugh and a prayer. He studies you for a moment. Then, in a voice almost too quiet to catch, he says, I'm not your enemy. You raise an eyebrow, skepticism clear in your posture. Doesn't feel like it. Perhaps not yet. But the path you walk is dangerous. I want to offer a way out before it's too late. You lean back in your chair, arms crossed, uncertain if this is a trap or a rescue. I'm listening. From within the folds of his robe, he produces a small parchment, carefully folded and worn at the edges. He slides it across the table, the paper whispering against the wood. You pick it up and unfold it. Inside, a list of names stares back at you. Some familiar, others cloaked in mystery. Nobles, courtiers, servants. People who smile during feasts and whisper during sermons. At the bottom, a single word has been inked in bold, unflinching script: conspirators. He begins to speak, his voice calm and clear. He tells you there is more than courtly intrigue afoot. This is not the usual jostling for titles and influence. This is something darker, deeper. A faction within the court is conspiring to overthrow the queen, not with swords alone but with sermons, with scripture twisted into daggers. They seek to use faith as a weapon, and they are moving faster than anyone suspects. He believes you, of all people, might be the only one nimble enough to uncover them. You chuckle, but it lacks warmth. The fool as detective. Sounds like a bad play. But it's not a play, he says, every syllable heavy with conviction. It's very real. You glance down at Pickle, who blinks at you slowly as if to say, you see. This is why I don't like following you into rooms with candles and ominous monks, Aldrich continues, his tone steady. I know you have no reason to trust me. But if we fail to act, the queen will fall. And you, well, you will fall with her. Whether you want to or not. You sit in silence for a beat, the list still in your hand, the names starting to weigh more than ink ever should. You think of the fires, the sudden sermons with pointed warnings, the murmurs that slither down stone corridors. All the pieces of a puzzle you never asked to solve. But now, laid bare before you, it is impossible to look away. You finally ask, "What do you want me to do?" He leans in closer, lowering his voice to a whisper that barely travels across the table. "Gather information. Use your role, your freedom. No one suspects a fool. You can move where others cannot. Listen where others are silenced. Find out who is involved. Bring me the truth." You nod slowly, still weighing each word. "And if I refuse?" He shrugs, a small, resigned movement. "Then you will be just another scapegoat in a game you never fully understood." You laugh again, but this time there is no amusement in it. Only resignation. Before you rise, he reaches once more into his robes and places something in your hand. A small silver pin, intricately crafted but discreet enough to pass unnoticed. It gleams faintly in the candlelight. "Use this," he says, "if you need to signal me. No words. Just this." As you walk back through the silent corridors, your footsteps echo along the stone floors. The halls feel colder now, longer. The weight of your role has shifted in ways you can't quite name. You are no longer just the court jester, no longer simply the fool meant to provoke laughter and roll your eyes at danger. Not yet a spy, but something in between. A performer now cast in a different sort of play, one with no rehearsals and no applause. That night, you sit beside a small fire, its light licking at the walls as shadows stretch around you. Pickle curls up at your feet with a soft grunt, his warmth a small comfort in the growing unease. You stare into the flames, the silver pin resting in your palm. And wonder how exactly you got caught in this ever-tightening web of secrets and schemes. Historians still debate whether jesters ever truly held power or were merely colorful pawns moved about the board for the amusement of others. Tonight, in the flicker of firelight and the stillness of your thoughts, you feel like both. You slip quietly back into the familiar rhythm of the jester's routine, the soft jingling of your bells barely audible as you weave your way through the winding corridors of the court. These halls stretch out before you like a labyrinth, a maze filled with whispered secrets, furtive glances, and half-closed doors that seem to conceal their own stories just beyond reach. The role you now play fits you like an old glove, worn thin but perfectly comfortable, that of the fool who watches more than he speaks, who laughs often but listens even more attentively. It is a role you have inhabited for so long that it feels part of your very skin, allowing you to move unseen and unnoticed through this world of power and deception. At your heels, Pickle remains your steadfast companion. His floppy ears twitch at every hushed conversation and every footfall echoing softly down the cold, stone passages. Somehow, with him by your side, the sharp edges of the court's treacherous shadows seem to dull just enough. It is as if the presence of this loyal little creature reminds you that the world around you has not entirely slipped into darkness. His quiet companionship is a small comfort, a steady beacon of warmth amid the chill and suspicion that pervade these ancient walls. With Pickle close, you feel less alone, as though some small part of the court remains free from hostility. You begin your investigation in the only way you know how. The way that suits your curious nature best, by poking around in places where you are least wanted, where your presence is not exactly welcome or expected. It is the fool's privilege to slip into hidden corners, to overhear what others would rather keep secret, and to gather scraps of truth from the murmurs of those around you. Your first stop is the bustling kitchens, a world apart from the polished halls above. Here, the air is thick and heavy with the rich smells of roasting meat, spilled herbs crushed under hurried hands, and the occasional sharp tang of burnt stew bubbling too long in its pot. The kitchen is a hotbed of gossip, its atmosphere as rich and thick as the gravy simmering in the large cauldrons. The talk here is far more potent than the stale bread handed out to the servants. You approach the cook, an older woman with a sharp tongue and eyes that seem to miss nothing. As she stirs her pots with a wooden spoon, grumbling about the day's disasters and the kitchen's constant chaos, she casually mentions a name. It is a name that hangs heavy in the air, Lord Malrek. He is a nobleman whose reputation is cloaked in shadow, known for his late-night visits and secretive conversations held behind closed doors. The mention of him sends a ripple of unease through your thoughts. You tuck that information carefully away in your mind, storing it like a precious secret that might unravel more if you pull the thread just right. From there, you make your way toward the stables, a place where the king's riders tend to their horses with near religious devotion. The air here is cooler, scented with hay, leather, and the faint musk of the animals. Rumors in the stables move as swiftly and unpredictably as the steeds themselves, changing with every whispered word. You find the stable master, a grizzled veteran whose weathered face is marked by scars that tell stories of battles long past. He regards you with a wary eye but eventually speaks. He tells you he has seen Lord Malrek slipping through the servants' entrance well after midnight on more than one occasion. Such behavior is certainly suspicious, though not enough on its own to accuse the man of treason. Still, the detail adds a new piece to the puzzle. As the pieces begin to come together, a clearer picture forms in your mind. This conspiracy is not one fought with open warfare, swords flashing or siege engines pounding on castle walls. Instead, it is a war waged in shadows, in silence, in the secret spaces that exist between whispered words and stolen glances. It is a game played in the hidden corners of the court, where trust is fragile and betrayal lurks beneath every smile. One evening, while you perform your usual antics in the great hall, you catch sight of Lady Aramel standing among the crowd. Her eyes dart nervously around the room, never lingering long on any one person. When your act ends, she pulls you aside, her voice low and urgent. "They're closer than you think," she warns, barely above a whisper. "And they have allies you would never expect." You press her for more information, but she shakes her head quickly. "Not here. Meet me in the rose garden at midnight," she insists before slipping away into the crowd. Later that night, beneath a sky scattered with cold, distant stars, you find her waiting quietly among the thorny bushes of the rose garden. The sharp thorns are silhouetted starkly in the pale moonlight, giving the scene an eerie beauty. She presses a folded parchment into your hand, a list of names, some familiar, others strange to you. Alongside it is a grim warning: trust no one. Not even those closest to you. A chill runs down your spine despite the warm night air, a reminder that danger lurks close. It is a curious truth that jesters were sometimes used as messengers or spies precisely because no one ever took them seriously. This fact is both amusing and deadly. There is a well-known story of one jester who carried secret letters cleverly disguised as bawdy jokes, until a jealous noble uncovered the deception and forced the jester to juggle knives while reciting the messages aloud before a hostile audience. The very role that grants jesters access to secrets also makes them vulnerable. Historians continue to debate whether the spying performed by jesters was an official duty sanctioned by rulers or merely a means of opportunistic survival. You suspect that the reality lies somewhere in between. Your own experience suggests that being a fool is more than mere entertainment. It is a delicate balancing act between laughter and danger. In the days that follow, you thread yourself carefully through the tangled web of court intrigue, balancing your duties as a fool with the secret role you have reluctantly accepted. Each conversation becomes a thread to pull, each laugh a clever distraction. You juggle the two lives you now lead, like flaming torches teetering in your hands, always wary that one misstep could send everything crashing down. One night, Pickle's sudden, sharp barking shatters the quiet stillness. The urgent sound drags you from restless sleep. You follow him quickly to the courtyard, where you catch sight of a hooded figure slipping away into the dark. Your heart pounds in your chest as you give chase, your footsteps echoing loudly in the stillness. The figure moves swiftly, disappearing through a hidden passage you never knew existed. You stand there, breathless and stunned, realizing that the secrets of this court run far deeper and darker than you ever dared to imagine. And you are right in the very center of them. That secret passage still carries the unmistakable scent of damp stone and ancient dust when you finally summon the courage to explore its shadowy depths. The air that meets you as you step inside is thick and cool, heavy with an age-old stillness that speaks of centuries gone undisturbed. It feels as though time itself pauses at the threshold, unwilling to tread further into this long-forgotten space. The walls seem to close in around you with a solemn hush, as if guarding the secrets held deep within. Pickle, ever your loyal and fearless companion, pads in confidently beside you. His tail wags with calm enthusiasm, his dark eyes gleaming with both curiosity and reassurance. He gives a soft whine, as if to say, "We've come this far. Don't stop now." Without hesitation, he takes the lead, his nose twitching busily as he sniffs along the edges of the ancient corridor, investigating every nook, every crumbling stone, every subtle shift in scent. The sound of his nails clicking lightly against the flagstone echoes softly ahead of you, oddly comforting in the hush. You follow close behind, more tentative than him, placing each foot with deliberate care upon the uneven floor. One hand clutches the cold silver mask you carry, a symbol, a tool, a shield, its smooth, weighty surface grounding you amid the gathering uncertainty. In the other, your fingers rest close to the hilt of a slender dagger tucked beneath your tunic. Its presence is a small reassurance, though you know well it would offer little protection against the schemes that fester in the dark. The passage is unsettlingly narrow, barely wider than your shoulders, forcing you to brush against the damp, coarse stone with every step. The walls feel close, almost sentient in their stillness, as if the ancient masonry is pressing in, curious or resentful about your intrusion after so many quiet years. Above, thin cobwebs catch faint glimmers of light, drifting like delicate veils. Your only illumination comes from a single candle clutched in your hand, a precious and hastily stolen flame, liberated from the kitchen's mere hours before. Its flickering light dances along the tunnel walls, casting strange and shifting shadows that seem to breathe and ripple with each movement of the flame. Far ahead, a soft and rhythmic dripping sound punctuates the silence, echoing faintly through the stone passage. Each drop strikes with a sound like a heartbeat, its presence both soothing and foreboding. Beneath your feet, the sound of your own footsteps bounces back at you in a ghostly mimicry, their echo stretched and hollow in the long corridor. As you press further, your thoughts begin to stray. You wonder how many others once traveled this path, and for what reason. Did they walk here in fear, desperate for escape from danger or punishment? Were they sent as messengers, bearing secrets meant only for the ears of the powerful? Or were these stones witness to darker intentions? Clandestine betrayals, forbidden meetings, deadly oaths whispered in torchlight? The possibilities linger like shadows in your mind, clinging tighter with each careful stride. Then, a sound. A rustle. Barely audible. A hush of fabric against stone, or perhaps the shifting of dust disturbed by unseen movement. You stop instantly. Pickle halts too, his posture rigid. A low growl rises in his throat, not fierce, but wary, like a warning sent into the dark. His ears twitch, his body poised. You draw a breath and hold it. Your grip tightens around the dagger at your hip. There is no telling what lies ahead, or behind. But you continue, slowly, determined, your pulse hammering in your ears. The passage eventually opens into a low-ceilinged chamber carved from the rock beneath the court. It's small, quiet, and utterly concealed from the world above. The air is heavier here, rich with the scent of mildew and something older still, perhaps forgotten oaths, long-dead ambitions, or dreams turned bitter with time. The candlelight reveals a table against one wall, buried beneath scrolls, torn parchment, and an unsettling array of symbols hastily drawn in ink. Maps are scattered across the surface, most creased and smeared with hurried notes. Atop them all lies a single folded letter. Its seal broken, addressed in sharp, deliberate strokes to the loyal few. You unfold the letter with trembling hands and scan its contents. The time is nigh. The Queen's enemies gather like wolves, but we are the pack that shall tear them apart. The jester moves among them, trust not his laughter. Your breath catches. Your heart stumbles in your chest. The words twist sharply inside you. They know. They have been watching you, not from a distance, but from within, with eyes hidden in plain sight. Every performance, every jest, every word spoken in shadows, they have not gone unnoticed. A sudden sound from behind shatters your focus, footsteps, slow but sure, approaching through the tunnel. Acting without thought, you sweep the papers aside and slip into the dark recess behind a thick pillar. You press yourself against the stone, breath shallow, body still. A figure enters. Cloaked, hooded, their movements precise, deliberate. They do not speak at first, simply scanning the room with a sharpness in their gaze that makes your skin prickle. One hand reaches out, lifting one of the maps. You see red circles inked over key points of the court, guard stations, the royal apartments, the great hall. Then, the figure mutters, more to themselves than anyone else, their voice low and edged with urgency. They're watching too closely. We need to act soon. You don't recognize the voice, but something in its tone fills you with dread. It is not the voice of hesitation, it is the voice of someone ready to strike. After a tense moment, the figure turns and slips back into the passage, vanishing into the shadows. You wait in stillness until their footsteps fade, until the only sound is once again that steady drip of unseen water. When you finally return to your own chambers, the silence feels different. Heavier. More dangerous. You sit in the dark, the silver mask resting in your lap. The candle burned nearly down to nothing. The pieces of the puzzle are coming together, but the picture they form is one of dread. The queen is surrounded, and you suspect she does not yet see it. The conspiracy is not just alive, it is thriving beneath her feet. You glance toward Pickle, who has curled beside you. He lifts his head, rests his chin on your knee. His quiet companionship is a balm, anchoring you once more. Your mind drifts to a strangely comforting absurdity. Not all secret tunnels in castles were built for escape. Some led to private dining rooms for forbidden delicacies, others to rendezvous of a more carnal kind, or illicit dice games tucked beneath the chapel. Perhaps some ancient cheese smuggler once crept along these very stones. But this passage, this one is something far darker. Historians may argue the truth. Some insist these secret networks were myths spun by storytellers eager for drama. Others argue they were systematic, designed as part of a greater architecture of control and manipulation. But here, now, in the hush of your chamber with the scent of dust and candle smoke hanging in the air, you know one thing for certain: the truth lies somewhere between history and legend. Somewhere in the shadows, you lift your gaze to the dark ceiling and wonder quietly, as Pickle breathes beside you, what will tomorrow bring? Laughter? Or blood? The next morning, you awaken slowly beneath the heavy weight of the secret chamber's revelations pressing down on your mind like a massive stone slab resting firmly upon your chest. Your head aches slightly, a dull and persistent throbbing that lingers just beneath the surface, most likely a leftover effect from the candle smoke that filled the air the night before, mixed with the restless turmoil swirling inside your thoughts. Perhaps it is simply the familiar, almost routine jester headache, the kind that tends to visit after nights spent juggling far more than just laughter and frivolity. You groan softly, stretching your arms high above your head in a desperate attempt to loosen the stiffness and shake off the dull throb that clings stubbornly. When your eyes flick downward, you find Pickle already waiting patiently by the door, sitting with perfect stillness, though his tail wags energetically as if it were his solemn duty to greet you promptly at dawn, which, in truth, is probably exactly what it has become. After quickly dressing, you make a firm decision to seek out the queen. Your choice is not driven by any craving for royal favor or the kind of attention that so often accompanies those who dwell within the palace walls, although, if you are honest, a small part of you admits that such attention would not be unwelcome. Instead, the driving force behind your visit is a pressing urgency to warn her of the threat you have uncovered. Or at the very least, to measure her reaction carefully and test the waters for what may come next. The news you carry is heavy and dangerous, like a fragile, ticking bomb in your hands, and you sense keenly that the Queen's awareness and possible intervention could mark the very difference between survival and catastrophic disaster. The royal chambers feel quieter than you have ever known them to be. The grand, opulent tapestries that typically ripple softly in the castle's drafts now hang motionless and limp, as if the very walls themselves are holding their breath in anxious anticipation. You find the queen seated alone by a tall window, her posture calm and composed as she gazes out over the sprawling gardens below. Her hands rest folded neatly in her lap, and her face carries the serene expression of someone lost in quiet contemplation, far removed from the usual bustle and intrigue that surrounds her throne. She looks up the moment you enter, and a faint, knowing smile flickers across her lips. "Ah, my jester! To what do I owe this unexpected visit so early in the day?" She inquires with gentle curiosity. You clear your throat, steadying your voice as you prepare to share the burden you carry. "I have uncovered a bit of unrest," you say carefully, choosing your words with caution. Her eyebrows lift slightly in interest. "Do tell," she invites, her tone calm but focused. You recount every detail: the secret passageway with its damp, cold stones, the cryptic note addressed ominously to the loyal few, and the cloaked figure you overheard speaking in hushed and urgent tones deep within the chamber. Throughout your entire explanation, she listens without interruption, her face a mask of unreadable calm and quiet strength. When you finish, she exhales a deep, heavy sigh, a sound that seems to carry the entire weight of the court upon it. "This court has teeth, my friend," she says quietly, her voice low and grave. "Some of those teeth are far sharper than you realize." You nod in understanding, suddenly feeling both small and vulnerable in her imposing presence despite the trust she places in you. "What should I do?" you ask, your voice barely above a whisper. With the grace of someone born to command, she rises from her seat and crosses the room to a small, ornately carved chest. From within, she retrieves a velvet pouch. You watch carefully as she opens it to reveal a handful of gleaming coins and a tiny, intricately carved amulet that catches the dim light and seems to glow faintly in your palm. "This is a symbol of my trust," she explains, holding it out to you with solemn seriousness. "Wear it discreetly. It might open doors, or it might close mouths." Your hand tightens around the gift, your heart racing with a mix of honor and disbelief. Never in your wildest dreams did you imagine that the queen would entrust something so precious and personal to you. The fool who dances on the fragile edge of courtly frivolity and mockery. Before you turn to leave, she adds softly, "Be careful. Not everyone here loves the queen. And even fewer have any fondness for the fool who dares to meddle in affairs that are not his own." As you make your way back through the winding corridors of the castle, the weight of responsibility settles over you like an ill-fitting cloak, awkward and unfamiliar, yet impossible to remove. You are no longer merely the entertainer whose sole purpose is to provoke laughter and lighten the mood. You have become a player in a deadly game where only your wit and courage will serve as your weapons. Later that day, you seek out Lady Aramel once more. You find her pacing restlessly in the dim light of a narrow hallway, moving with the tense, alert energy of a cat poised to pounce. "More news?" you ask quietly, stepping closer to her side. She nods quickly, pulling you into the shadowed corner where no one else can overhear. "The factions are stirring," she whispers urgently. "The conspirators plan to strike during the upcoming feast. We must be ready." Your stomach tightens painfully at the revelation. Feasts are supposed to be times of celebration, filled with food, drink, and the terrible dancing of over-enthusiastic courtiers, not the scenes for political assassinations and whispered betrayals. A quirky thought crosses your mind: medieval feasts could last for days on end, featuring course after course of elaborate and rich dishes so heavy that guests often needed time simply to recover. Some jesters, ever cunning and resourceful, use these long, drawn-out celebrations as opportunities to sneak into forbidden chambers, overhear whispered secrets, or even slip suspicious substances into the wine cups of their unsuspecting targets. Being overlooked in such moments had its unexpected perks. Historians have long debated the true extent of the influence jesters wielded in court politics, whether they were merely harmless entertainers or subtle manipulators capable of shifting the tide of fate. Tonight, as you absorb the gravity of your role, you find yourself leaning firmly toward the ladder. You return to your chambers and begin to lay out a plan carefully. Your performances will serve as a perfect cover to gather information, alert trusted allies, and prepare for what promises to be a night fraught with danger during the grand feast. You glance down at Pickle, who looks up at you with bright, trusting eyes and seems to offer a small, encouraging nod of approval. The days ahead will test everything you possess, your wit, your courage, and perhaps, just maybe, a little bit of luck. The days began to blur together in a dizzying, almost disorienting way, each one bleeding into the next with barely a line of demarcation to separate them. Morning bled into afternoon, afternoon into dusk, and before you could fully gather your thoughts, darkness fell once again. You found yourself living inside a haze, drifting through time marked not by bells or candles, but by the anxious rise and fall of breath, the silent communication of nods and glances, and the whisper of slippered footsteps down corridors not meant to echo. Each day was swallowed by the same mounting unease. Your hours were consumed by whispered meetings conducted furtively in the cold shadows of forgotten stairwells and drafty alcoves. Places where cobwebs shared secrets and dust never dared settle for long. Only the most trusted gathered with you, eyes narrowed against betrayal, voices hushed to bare murmurs. Words were measured carefully, exchanged beneath the ever-present hum of the castle's daily bustle, the clank of dishes, the rustle of fabric, the drone of conversation that carried secrets to walls old enough to remember rebellions long past. You spoke so softly that even those ancient stones might have failed to catch the truth in your warnings. Stolen glances flitted through the court like fleeting shadows, passed between conspirators with the weight of entire sentences contained in a single twitch of an eyebrow or tightening of a jaw. Each look was heavy with unspoken meaning, messages of caution, affirmation, fear. The court itself began to thrum with tension, like a taut string pulled tighter with each passing hour, on the verge of snapping. The atmosphere grew so thick it was almost a physical thing, pressing down on every breath, making even laughter seem strained and unnatural. The air was dense with suspicion, weighted by silence that stretched just a moment too long between friendly greetings and polite exchanges. And in the very heart of this quiet storm, you existed like a thread running through the center of a labyrinth, shifting endlessly from one role to another. You were the jester, still, the fool in motley, the performer of light and levity. The court's expected source of mirth, even as fear seeped into the marrow of every guest. Your jokes provided a brief release from the tension, your tumbles and clever rhymes a distraction from the ever-present sense of dread. But behind that painted smile, behind every wink and bow, your thoughts churned furiously. At other times, you took on the guise of a spy, your ears sharpened by necessity, catching whispers from behind doors left slightly ajar. And eyes always scanning, searching for a slip, a misstep, a glance held too long. You memorized footsteps, noted unusual silences, tracked who lingered too near whom for too many nights. When the danger drew close, you became something else again, a protector. The queen's unseen shield, her shadow where none should fall. You kept watch over those dear to you, Lady Aramel, the queen herself, with a vigilance that ran deep beneath your comic exterior, but when the court's tension grew almost unbearable, when your mind cried out for a moment's reprieve from the quiet dread, you would return to one of your simpler roles, just a dog walker. In those moments, you strolled the sprawling castle grounds with Pickle trotting contentedly at your side. Ears perked and tongue lolling in the sun. Those walks became your sanctuary, a slice of calm stolen from the chaos, where you could pretend for a moment that all was as it once was. Throughout this turbulent stretch of time, Pickle remained the one true constant, your anchor amid the surging tide. His quiet loyalty never wavered. His warm body pressed close to your side at night, and his playful barking in the daylight brought levity when the world offered none. Even his occasional mischief, chasing down a kitchen rat or startling a noblewoman's bird-like lapdog, was oddly comforting. His energy, undimmed by fear or politics, offered precious moments of laughter and normalcy, reminding you that innocence still had a place, however small, within the walls of the court. As the day of the feast loomed ever nearer, arriving with the cruel inevitability of a storm long foreseen, you poured your anxious energy into your craft. You labored with uncommon focus to construct a performance that would serve two masters, the laughter-loving king, whose hunger for entertainment was as notorious as his distaste for subtlety, and the increasingly fragile network of allies you hoped to warn through innuendo and wit. The act you designed was a layered puzzle of pratfalls and punchlines, filled with double meanings and veiled messages. You blended farce with foresight, each jest stitched carefully with warnings hidden between the syllables, each stumble designed to mask a glance or smuggle a signal. Your hope was that, even if the king laughed, others would listen. During one of your final rehearsals, as you spun and twisted in mock pain after a perfectly executed tumble, you noticed a presence at the edge of the room. Lady Aramel stood silently in the half-light, her arms folded and her expression unreadable. When the rehearsal ended, she approached with quiet, determined steps and guided you aside into a narrow passage behind a velvet curtain. There, in that breathless space between torchlight and shadow, she leaned in and whispered with grave urgency, "The conspirators are far more organized and deeply embedded than we initially feared," she said, her voice tight with controlled panic. "They've positioned people in every corner of the court, in the kitchens, among the guards, even within the nobles' own circles. No one can be trusted blindly. Not anymore." You held her gaze, the words pressing a leaden weight against your heart. The fragile web of alliances you had so carefully built now felt more like a net poised to collapse, its threads fraying with every whispered betrayal. You could feel the game shifting beneath your feet, a treacherous dance where a single misstep could end everything, and then, as surely as the sun rises, the day of the feast arrived. The great hall, once familiar, had been transformed into something almost mythic. Draped in golden light and velvet banners, with torches flaring high in iron sconces, it dazzled every eye. Long tables groaned under the weight of roasted boar, spiced fowl, glazed vegetables, fruits candied in honey and studded with nuts. Silver goblets gleamed, and music swelled to fill the vaulted ceilings. The stone walls caught the flickering flames and threw dancing shadows across the revelers, casting a shifting glow that felt both beautiful and vaguely menacing. You moved through the crowd as easily as slipping into a well-worn coat. Your role fit like a second skin, laughter on your lips and mischief in your eyes. You cracked jokes, spun in wild circles, juggled apples and leapt into cartwheels, always watching, always aware. Your allies knew what to look for: a hand gesture, a code word, a sudden shift in rhythm. The silver mask you wore, sometimes on your face, sometimes hanging at your side, served as more than mere costume. It was a silent reminder that you stood at the crossroads of comedy and danger, truth and illusion. Then, midway through the revelry, a sound shattered the harmony. A sudden gasp, followed by the unmistakable crash of a goblet to stone. All heads turned. A nobleman, seated near the high table, rose awkwardly, then staggered, clutching at his throat with both hands. His eyes bulged in terror, his face already paling. His mouth moved soundlessly as he choked, then spasmed violently. Plates clattered to the floor. Guests screamed. Chaos erupted. Without hesitation, you darted toward the scene, Pickle surging forward at your side, barking sharply as if he too sensed the shift in air and mood. You pushed past nobles and servants, rushing to where the man had collapsed, a tangle of limbs and crimson-stained silks. The court physician was already on his way, shoving through the crowd with determined haste. He knelt, fingers probing, lips moving in quiet incantations of diagnosis. But it was too late. The noble's breath rattled once, then ceased. His body stilled, a silence, thick and unnatural, fell over the hall. Then came the whisper, cold and unmistakable: poison. It spread like smoke, curling into every ear, tightening every chest. The word carried weight, fear, finality. You looked up and met Lady Aramel's eyes across the room. Her expression was grave, unreadable, but her slight nod spoke volumes. The shadows you had hunted were now undeniable. The conspiracy was no longer theory or warning, it had arrived. It was here. The feast was not merely a celebration of harvest or kingship. It was a battleground. A place where invisible daggers were drawn in silence and struck without warning. A place where power played out not in proclamations but in poisoned goblets and clever masks. Historians would later argue over the prevalence of poison in such courts. Some would claim it was common, a favorite weapon of the ambitious. Others would dismiss it as folklore, a phantom born of fear. But as you stood there, heart hammering in your chest, surrounded by a court teetering on the edge of hysteria, you knew one thing with chilling certainty: the danger was real. As panic consumed the hall and cries rose like smoke to the rafters, you slipped quietly away into the shadows. Your footsteps made no sound. Your thoughts moved faster than your feet. This was no longer about survival. It was about resolution. The true puppet master behind the poison had made their opening move. Now, you would have to make yours. The death of the poisoned noble sent shockwaves through the court, rippling outward like stones hurled into the still waters of a tranquil pond, disturbing its glassy surface with ever-widening circles of alarm. The initial horror spread with startling speed, slicing clean through the fragile veil of calm that had cloaked the evening's festivities. What had been meant to be a night of opulence, merriment, and abundant celebration collapsed with a jarring suddenness into something far more sinister, a tide of chaos that surged through the heart of the palace like floodwaters breaching ancient walls. The great hall erupted into confusion. Gasps turned to cries, and elegant gowns swept the floor in frantic motion as courtiers scrambled to distance themselves from the sight of the death. As though physical space could shield them from implication, or the next poisoned goblet. Heavy boots clattered as the guards stormed in, summoned by the cry of a steward and the dull clang of the warning bell. Their ironclad forms surged forward, a mass of clanking metal and drawn steel, moving with purpose as they sought to restore a semblance of control to the fraying edges of the evening. Where once there had been laughter and flirtation, the air was now thick with suspicion. The guests' faces, still pale from the shock, twisted in quiet panic. Voices dropped to anxious murmurs, and the glances that passed between nobles were no longer playful or polite. They were sharp. Calculating. Some looked for allies, others for scapegoats. No one felt safe. Trust, so carefully performed in the artifice of courtly life, shattered beneath the weight of dread. The invisible web that held the court together was fraying at every thread. Even the queen, long revered for her unflappable poise and cold command, betrayed the faintest hints of internal strain. Her posture remained regal, her shoulders high and crown unshaken, but her fingers clenched the edge of the throne's armrests with quiet force, the knuckles paling. In her eyes, those ever-calculating, steady eyes, you caught a flicker of something rare, not panic, not fear, but the weight of choices being measured with desperate speed. The storm had arrived on her doorstep, and for the first time in many months, her mask of serenity began to show the finest cracks. You lingered along the periphery of the gathering, half shadowed by a fluted column, the roar of your pulse filling your ears like muffled bells tolling in warning. The familiar jester's smile, usually so effortless in its brightness, now felt alien on your lips, thin, strained, and brittle as frost on glass. Behind it, your thoughts raced with frantic precision. The mask you wore was no longer simply theatrical, it was your shield. Your disguise. Your survival. Lady Aramel appeared beside you with the silent grace of a shadow. Her cloak swirled faintly behind her as she moved with clipped urgency. When she spoke, her voice was low but sharp, cutting through the chaos like a knife through velvet. "We need to act quickly," she said, eyes scanning the room with trained vigilance. "The conspirators will already be shifting their plans. If we don't move now, they'll be gone, ghosts before the trail's even cold." Her glance over her shoulder, subtle but telling, carried the unmistakable flavor of fear, not the paralyzing kind, but the sharpened kind, honed into action. You nodded, heart pounding with the force of adrenaline. There was no time for hesitation. The court was a labyrinth, an ornate warren of secret chambers, hidden doors, and echoing corridors, each one a potential path to discovery or ruin. Somewhere within it, your enemies were already moving, covering their tracks with practiced ease. The kitchens became your first destination. Their heat and bustle had dimmed since the poisoning, replaced with a hushed panic. Fires still burned in the great hearths, but the cooks moved with the heavy air of dread, their spoons trembling in uncertain hands. Fear clung to them like grease. When you questioned them, their replies came in nervous whispers, words clipped and cautious. They spoke of a stranger, a pale-eyed figure who had come days before, delivering a curious herb to the stores. None knew his name. None had seen his face clearly. But they all remembered the herb, delicate, dark-veined, and smelling faintly of crushed pine and rot. "It's rare," one of the cooks murmured, "and dangerous if mishandled. A pinch too much, and—" She trailed off, drawing a finger slowly across her throat. Another added, almost reverently, "In the right hands, it kills before the victim realizes it." You scribbled the name they gave, Hemlock, onto the back of a playing card and tucked it into your sleeve. Your next stop was the stables, where the air was thick with hay, horse sweat, and something far less pleasant, unease. The stable master, a man with salt-flecked hair and eyes like flint, recounted a sighting from 3 nights prior, a cloaked figure near the herb stores. Lingering too long beneath the moonlight. Didn't speak, the man muttered. Didn't belong. You thanked him, your unease growing. The pieces were assembling into something unmistakably dark, but even as clues emerged, dangers multiplied. The guards, those who once served as unwavering extensions of the Queen's will, were no longer a monolith of loyalty. Some watched you with veiled distrust. Others made no effort to hide their suspicion. You could feel the ground shifting beneath your feet, the court's power fracturing like ice under pressure. The Queen's grip on her realm was loosening. You could see it in every sideways glance, every forced salute. Then, a thought emerged, unbidden, but unmistakable. A passage from an old jester's compendium, memorized long ago beneath candlelight. In times of courtly intrigue, jesters had sometimes employed a strange tactic, offering mock poison to suspected traitors, watching for reactions. Panic was often a stronger truth than words. It was a dangerous ploy, foolish, perhaps. Or genius. You considered it now, wondering if you could afford such a gamble. Or whether you were already neck-deep in the game with no choice but to play it to the hilt. The scholars would debate for generations the role poison played in politics of this era. Some insisted it was myth, phantoms conjured to keep courtiers obedient. Others believed it rampant, a silent killer that seeped into goblets and game pies. You had seen enough to side with the latter. Poison was real. And tonight, it had come much too close. Determined to find the source, you turned your attention to one man, Lord Roderick, advisor to the Queen, and a figure who had always unsettled you with his smile that never reached his eyes. Smooth, articulate, and unfailingly polite, he was the kind of man who left you colder the longer you spoke with him. He was also cunning, perhaps too cunning to be uninvolved. Slipping into his chambers was easier than expected. The corridors were in disarray. The guards distracted. Pickle padded silently behind you, his ears perked, every step careful. Inside, Lord Roderick looked up from his papers, surprise flickering in his gaze. "Trouble in paradise?" you asked, injecting levity into your voice, though each syllable was edged with tension. He chuckled, low and smooth. "Just a little spice to keep things interesting," he said, but there was something else beneath the words. You took a careful step forward. "I hear the poison was hemlock." For just a moment, barely a heartbeat, his smile faltered. You leaned in, your tone still light, but sharpened with implication. "Care to explain how it found its way into the royal kitchen?" The change was immediate. Roderick rose with a suddenness that made Pickle growl low in his throat. His gaze narrowed, his voice like cold iron. "Be careful, fool. Joking about such matters can be very dangerous. You flashed your most practiced grin, though your palms had gone cold. I've never been safer. You slipped out before he could answer, heart hammering wildly against your ribs. Each step carried the weight of revelation. The true danger, you realized with a creeping dread, might not be some distant traitor hiding in the shadows. It might be someone far, far closer than you had ever dared to imagine. The tension within the court grew heavier by the hour, thickening in the air like layers of unwashed linen. It was oppressive, stale, and suffocating, pressing down on every breath, every glance, every unspoken thought. As you weaved your way through the labyrinthine corridors and dimly lit chambers of the castle, each step felt burdened by the mounting weight of suspicion. It had settled over the court like a dense, choking fog, curling through the cracks in stone walls and seeping into the hearts of every soul who lingered within. The queen's patience, once known to be formidable and unyielding, now showed signs of wear, fraying at the edges as if unraveling slowly and relentlessly. Thread by delicate thread. You could feel it with an unsettling clarity, like a change in the wind before a storm. Each glance cast in your direction carried an unmistakable sharpness, a pointed intensity that cut deeper than any spoken accusation. It was as if an invisible blade had been raised, poised just above your skin, ready to strike suddenly and without mercy at the first misstep. The gentle tinkling of your jester's bells, which once rang with lightness and laughter, chiming merrily in tune with courtly joy, had changed. That once comforting sound had become a hollow echo, eerie and out of place. Now, it resonated with dissonance, serving as a somber, discordant soundtrack to the slow and inevitable collapse of order and trust within the court's once glorious halls. Realizing that the usual channels of information might now be compromised, or perhaps far too dangerous to rely upon, you resolved to change your approach. The nobles, whose trust you had once carefully earned, now eyed you with wary suspicion. Their words were guarded, their smiles thin. Instead of risking entanglement with their scrutiny, you turned your attention elsewhere. You sought out the ones who existed in the margins, who dwelled in the unseen corners of the castle. The servants. These were the quiet observers, the invisible eyes and ears who moved unnoticed through grand chambers and darkened corridors. They were the ones who watched without being seen, who listened without being heard. So often overlooked or dismissed as inconsequential, they were in fact the true keepers of secrets. They bore witness to whispered conspiracies exchanged behind locked doors, to fleeting gestures laden with meaning, to conversations thought to be private but never truly hidden. If anyone in the castle held the key to unlocking the truth that lay buried beneath layers of fear and deception, it would be these silent figures, moving like shadows through the castle's depths. During one of your performances, as you danced and twirled between the murmuring crowd, your eyes caught a flicker of movement. A young maid named Ellen stood out amidst the flurry of activity. She was small and swift, her motions hurried yet deliberate. There was something about her that drew your attention. She moved with a nervous urgency, her hands quick but trembling ever so slightly. Amid the rustle of skirts and clinking goblets, in a moment so fleeting it might have been missed entirely, she slipped a folded note into your palm. Her fingers brushed yours with a subtle tremor, and her eyes met yours for only a second. That one glance conveyed volumes. There was urgency in her gaze. But also fear, a fear sharp and raw, barely contained behind her careful mask. The note itself was crude, the letters hastily scrawled and barely legible, but the message it carried was unmistakable. Meet by the well at midnight. Come alone. You gave her the smallest of nods in acknowledgement, careful not to draw attention. A tight swirl of hope, mingled with apprehension, coiled deep in your chest. When the great clock finally tolled midnight, you moved with practiced silence through the shadowed expanse of the castle grounds. Pickle, your ever-loyal companion, padded beside you with quiet precision, his soft paws barely making a sound against the cold, time-worn stones beneath your feet. The old well waited in the moonlight, wrapped in a blanket of moss and shadow. It was a relic from an age-long past, its surface chipped and weathered, its stones cool to the touch. Overhead, the moon hung full and low in the sky, casting a pale, ethereal light across the courtyard. The night breeze stirred the air, and the shadows cast by ancient towers and broken statues swayed gently, creating the illusion that the darkness itself was alive and watching. From the gloom, Ellen emerged. Her face was tense, her posture hunched with the weight of secrecy. Her eyes darted around the empty courtyard before finally settling on you. She stepped closer, her voice barely above a breath. "They're planning something," she said, her tone low and urgent. "It's more than just poison. The Queen's life is in serious danger." You leaned in closer, heart pounding, eyes fixed on hers. "Tell me everything," you urged, keeping your voice steady despite the sudden tightening in your throat. "They will gather in the ruins of the chapel," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's a place no one visits anymore, abandoned and forgotten. They'll meet there tomorrow night. You have to stop them before it's too late." Your mouth went dry at her words. You swallowed hard, the taste of fear bitter on your tongue. The chapel ruins were a desolate place, long left to decay. Cracked and broken stones littered the floor, shattered remnants of once beautiful stained glass lay in colorful fragments, and the air always seemed cold there, filled with the lingering echoes of forgotten prayers. It was the perfect place for a meeting cloaked in secrecy, a place no one dared to visit, let alone question. Before you could press her further, Ellen suddenly reached out, gripping your arm with surprising strength. She leaned in even closer, her voice dropping to a mere whisper. "Be careful," she said. "Trust no one." The weight of her words settled heavily in your chest as she slipped away, vanishing into the night like mist, leaving behind only the memory of her warning and the lingering imprint of her fingers on your sleeve. In the silence that followed, a peculiar memory surfaced from your jester's handbook. It spoke of how jesters, often seen as harmless fools, had sometimes used coded signals and hidden gestures to convey secret messages. Woven into their performances or even their brightly colored costumes. These signals allowed them to communicate without words, to alert allies or deliver warnings without arousing suspicion. You began to consider the idea with increasing seriousness. Perhaps a slight tilt of the head, a specific flick of the wrist, a deliberately timed bow. Something small and seemingly insignificant to most, but unmistakable to those who knew what to look for. It would be a quiet way to share knowledge, to pass on the truth without tipping your hand to the enemies who watched you so closely. Historians still debate the true role of jesters in the tangled web of medieval espionage. Some argue they were mere distractions, used to entertain and deflect attention while more serious affairs unfolded. But others believe they were critical figures, placed perfectly to gather intelligence and influence events from within. Tonight, standing in the moonlight with Ellen's warning echoing in your ears, you felt less like a fool and more like an informant. A quiet agent in the heart of the storm. The rest of the day passed in a blur of tension and preparation. Every movement, every word, was laced with caution. You practiced your routine with careful precision, drilling the hidden signal into your muscle memory until it flowed as naturally as a smile. The nerves twisting in your stomach refused to ease, but beneath the surface, something steadier had begun to form. A resolve had taken root. It burned like steel deep inside you, sharp and unyielding, ready to face the dangers that now loomed just beyond the horizon. Tomorrow night, beneath the cover of darkness and within the silent embrace of the ancient chapel ruins, you would confront the very heart of the conspiracy. Whatever truths lay buried there, whatever peril awaited, you would not turn away. Pickle looked up at you then, his eyes bright and unwavering. In their depths, you saw courage, fierce and loyal, a quiet strength that mirrored your own. You met his gaze and gave him a steady, reassuring nod. Whatever shadows awaited, you would face them together. You would not face the night alone. The sun sank slowly, its descent graceful and deliberate, casting the sky in hues of deepening orange and fading crimson. The glowing orb, rich and radiant, resembled a molten gold coin slipping ever so gently beneath the edge of the distant horizon. Its last, lingering rays stretched long and languid across the towering stone walls of the castle, bathing the weathered surface in a glowing mantle of amber light and elongated shadows. The grandeur of the ancient stronghold seemed, for a fleeting moment, suspended in a golden reverie, as if time itself were pausing to admire the scene. As the light continued to fade and twilight gave way to night, you busied yourself with quiet, methodical preparations for the midnight rendezvous that loomed ahead. The usual symphony of castle life, the rhythmic clatter of boots against flagstones, the low hum of voices engaged in idle gossip or urgent business, the occasional burst of laughter echoing from unseen corridors, had faded to a near-complete silence. It was as though the very walls had exhaled and gone still, surrendering to the stillness of approaching night. In its place, an eerie quiet spread like a mist, seeping into every hall and chamber, curling into the corners of vaulted ceilings and around the arches of once bustling passageways. The castle, for all its strength and majesty, now seemed shrouded in a heavy, ghost-like calm. The only sounds that managed to break through the dense quiet were fleeting and distant, the faint echo of solitary footsteps resonating far off in the twisting labyrinth of inner passageways. And the occasional, melancholy hoot of a solitary owl perched high among the gnarled branches of the ancient trees that ringed the fortress. The owl's mournful call seemed less like a cry and more like a question, drifting through the dark with an air of ancient knowing. Pickle's sensitive ears twitched with every faint creak, every rustle of leaves in the wind, every movement too small for your eyes to detect. His sharp gaze scanned the darkness without rest, vigilant and loyal. Yet he never strayed from your side, his quiet presence a steadying anchor in the growing tide of night. With deliberate care and silent determination, you slipped quietly from your chamber. Each step forward felt measured and meaningful, as though the very air resisted your movement. The weight of the hours to come pressed heavily upon your chest, coiling within you like a tight spring. You were cloaked not only in the physical darkness that now blanketed the castle grounds, but also in a swirling blend of emotions. Nervous anticipation sparked through your veins, tempered by the ever-present edge of caution that whispered with every footfall. The soles of your boots touched the cold, unyielding stone floors with quiet resolve, and the thick shadows that filled the passageways seemed to reach up to swallow each step, rendering you a ghost among phantoms. The air that hung in the halls was cool and damp, a relic of centuries past. It carried with it more than moisture, it carried the weight of old prayers, long faded into silence, and solemn vows whispered in desperate hope but never fulfilled. You felt, deep in your bones, that the stones beneath your feet were keepers of memory. They had borne witness to joy and betrayal, to glory and ruin. They had absorbed sorrow like rain, and the secrets they held had never been spoken aloud. Ahead of you loomed the ruined chapel, a silhouette of broken grandeur etched against the starlit sky. What remained of its walls stood jagged and uneven, their original grace softened and blurred by years of unchecked moss and the slow, patient erosion of wind and time. It stood as a skeletal monument to what once was, a crumbling shrine to belief and loss. The chapel no longer offered sanctuary to the faithful, but instead served as a grim sentinel, guarding truths that had been deliberately hidden and conspiracies buried deep beneath stone and silence. You took your place in the shadows, muscles drawn taut, your breath shallow and measured. Every sense was sharpened to a keen edge. Your eyes strained to pierce the darkness. Your ears listened intently, eager for even the subtlest shift in the silence. Then, like a whisper turned to a growl, the crunch of approaching footsteps disturbed the gravel path outside the chapel. You tensed, heart hammering in your chest, until a familiar figure emerged from the gloom. Ellen stepped into the moonlight, her pale face visible beneath the edge of her hood. It was drawn with worry, and yet beneath that surface lay a hardened core of resolve. Behind her came two more figures, moving with deliberate care. Their forms were obscured by heavy cloaks, their presence little more than shadows stitched into the dark of the night. They drew closer, voices rising in low, urgent whispers. Their hurried words spoke of danger, of hidden enemies lurking within the Queen's court, and of the dire consequences that failure would bring. You listened with unwavering attention, absorbing each carefully spoken phrase, and slowly the jagged pieces of a dark and complicated puzzle began to align in your mind. The fragile silence was shattered in a heartbeat. A sharp crack split the air, a twig breaking beneath a careless step. The sound, small and sudden, rang like a bell in the hush of night. Every figure froze, heads turning as one, breath caught and held tight. From the deepest shadows stepped a man whose face was all too familiar. Lord Malrek emerged, his presence unmistakable and unnerving. He wore a smirk that curled with cruel delight, and his eyes, glinting like polished stone, were filled with a venomous intensity. His voice cut through the tension, cold and biting. "You are meddling where you should not, Jester," he snarled, his tone laced with contempt and barely veiled threat. "Your instinct was to retreat, but the chapel's treacherous ground betrayed you. Your foot caught against a loose stone, sending your body stumbling forward in a desperate attempt to remain upright. Time seemed to hesitate, stretching that precarious instant into something far longer. The weight of silence pressed down once again, and for a breathless moment, it felt as though the world held its breath. Then, without warning, the two cloaked figures behind Ellen threw back their hoods and stepped forward. With practiced grace and firm conviction, they revealed themselves as loyal guards. Protectors sworn to the Queen's safety and the integrity of the realm. Their sudden reveal broke the spell. Their presence stood as a bulwark between you and the danger now poised to strike. Malrek's sneer faltered, the smugness on his face curdling into frustration and thinly veiled rage. Yet he understood the odds had shifted. With nothing more than a dark scowl and a final glare, he backed away, his form retreating into the surrounding night until it vanished, leaving no trace but the lingering sense of danger. Ellen released a breath she had clearly been holding, the sound quiet but filled with palpable relief. Her shoulders lowered, her posture softening for the first time since your paths had crossed. "You are braver than I thought," she said softly, the compliment sincere and without flourish. There was a quiet admiration in her voice, unexpected but unmistakable. You gave a small nod in return, though your chest still heaved with the pounding rhythm of your heart. The conspiracy you had stumbled into was far more intricate, and the threat more potent, than you had ever dared imagine. But even amid the peril, one truth stood out with sudden clarity. You were no longer alone in this. Together, you and Ellen began to craft a plan. Words were spoken in hushed tones, ideas exchanged quickly and carefully. You formed the beginnings of a strategy to warn the Queen and prepare the court for the storm that was almost certainly on its way. As you made your way back through the castle's shadowed halls, Pickle remained close, his soft steps mirroring your own. Your thoughts churned with the weight of what had just transpired, a tangled mix of fatigue and determination. You were exhausted, yet each breath you took seemed to deepen your resolve. You had stepped far beyond the role that once defined you. You were no longer merely a fool employed to provoke laughter, to juggle, to mock, and to dance. This night had changed you. You had entered a different stage, one where words held power and silence hid blades. A peculiar memory surfaced, a tale whispered through the years among jesters, half believed and half dismissed. It spoke of jesters who had trained in the art of defense, who had learned more than antics and riddles. They had mastered tricks to escape capture, techniques to disarm foes, and strategies for surviving courts riddled with shadows and betrayal. Perhaps it was time for you to seek out those same forgotten skills, to learn them for yourself before fate forced your hand. Historians still argue whether such jesters truly existed, or whether these were simply romantic myths. Stories spun for entertainment around hearth fires. You now suspected that the truth was far more complex, resting somewhere between legend and reality. As you slipped quietly back into the familiar confines of your chamber, the silence no longer felt like safety, but a space brimming with potential. Your gaze drifted to the window, where the first hints of pale dawn hovered at the edge of night. Whatever awaited you beyond that coming light, one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The dawn breaks slowly, spreading its pale and gentle light like spilled cream across the cold stone battlements and the sprawling, dew-drenched gardens below. The air holds a hushed stillness, as though the world itself is pausing to breathe before the stirrings of the day begin in earnest. You find yourself sitting quietly at the edge of your chamber window, knees drawn close, eyes fixed on the awakening court that stretches out before you. The silhouettes of early risers begin to flicker into motion. Courtiers and servants, yawning and rubbing sleep from their eyes, begin to move about the grounds, slipping into their morning routines with the absent-minded ease of habit. None of them, it seems, are aware of the invisible threads of danger that are tightening around them with each passing moment. Your mind refuses to rest. It turns again and again, like a millstone, grinding through the memories of the night before. You remember the sharp and venomous threat hissed from Lord Malrec's lips, the way Ellen stepped forward with courage that caught you off guard, and most of all, the heavy and looming shadow of danger that now hovers so close to the Queen's life. There is a cold knot in your stomach that will not unwind, and it tightens every time you close your eyes. Before long, you are summoned. The Queen herself has requested your presence in her private garden. A place whispered of but rarely seen by most. The path there winds through trimmed hedges and quiet courtyards, leading to a secluded and tranquil nook hidden behind tall walls draped with ivy. The garden is small but lovingly tended. Roses bloom in a dozen shades, their scent mingling with the fresh sharpness of morning dew. The perfume is delicate, almost ethereal, and for a moment it eases the tension coiled in your chest. The Queen is already there, standing by a carved stone bench surrounded by flowering vines. Her gaze meets yours, and you see something serious and heavy in her expression. There is gravity in her stance, but a glimmer of gratitude lights her eyes, softening the hard lines of her face. She motions for you to come closer. "You have done well, fool," she says quietly, her voice low but steady. "Not only with your jokes that lighten the burdens of this court, but with your bravery when it truly mattered most." You bow your head deeply, your posture respectful, though your heart pounds with the force of 1,000 unspoken thoughts. You feel the immense weight of her trust settling upon your shoulders, wrapping around you like a thick and heavy cloak. It is at once humbling and terrifying. With a gentle movement, the Queen extends a hand and passes you a sealed letter. The parchment is crisp and clean, bearing the official mark of the crown in wax. It is an order, clear, direct, and without embellishment. It instructs the arrangement of discreet protection details, names loyal guards to be quietly reassigned, and outlines steps to ensure security without attracting suspicion. "This court will be tested in ways we cannot yet imagine," she warns, her voice dropping lower. "I need people around me on whom I can rely completely. You are one of those few." Her words strike like a bell in your chest, loud and undeniable. You were not prepared for this level of trust, nor the sense of responsibility it brings. Something stirs inside you, an unexpected mixture of honor, duty, and a rising unease at the peril now entwined with your path. The days that follow bring subtle but unmistakable changes. The palace remains outwardly the same, but beneath the surface, you feel the difference. The guards glance your way with a flicker of respect that wasn't there before. The nobles, who once scoffed or turned their noses up at your approach, now offer you small nods, their eyes holding something thoughtful. The Queen's smiles, though still rare, carry a warmth now, a quiet, genuine appreciation that never existed before. But none of this is enough to ease your mind. The threat that haunts the palace lingers, thick as morning mist, impossible to grasp but equally impossible to ignore. The conspirators remain cloaked in patience and cunning. They wait, watching and scheming with desperation that makes them dangerous beyond measure. You sharpen your performances, keeping them light, bright, and full of laughter. Yet hidden within your lines are warnings, veiled and quiet, meant only for those wise enough to hear them. Your silver mask catches the flickering light of the torches and chandeliers, reflecting it with a gleam that seems to speak of secrets and silent vigilance. One evening, during a lull in the grand feast, You pause near a cluster of nobles too deep in their whispered conversation to notice your approach. The words you overhear send a chill rushing down your spine. A plan is in motion, carefully crafted and venomous. The conspirators intend to frame Lady Aramel, the Queen's most trusted advisor. They mean to tarnish her name, sully her loyalty, and break the strength of the Queen's inner circle. You act without hesitation. Breathless, with your heart racing, you rush through quiet halls and hidden passages to find Lady Aramel. When you speak, she listens in silence. Her eyes narrow, cold and sharp like cut glass, as she absorbs every word. Then, slowly, she nods. Together, the two of you craft a countermeasure. It is subtle, intricate, and dangerous. It involves the setting of a stage, both literal and metaphorical. You will use your performance, your position, and your words to draw out the conspirators. You will turn your comedy into a trap. You begin preparing the performance with meticulous care. Every joke, every gesture is shaped with dual meaning. What seems light-hearted on the surface is bait beneath, each line carefully calculated to provoke those hiding in plain sight. You know your craft well, and this time, it may be your greatest role yet. A curious detail rises from memory, something you once read in a dusty old tome. Jesters, in some courts, practiced what was known as coded laughter, a clever form of hidden communication using specific laughs, gestures, or expressions to send signals to trusted allies. It was a sort of medieval Morse code, cloaked in merriment. You begin to train in this technique with diligence, perfecting the rhythm and timing until your signals can pass unnoticed to all but those who know what to look for. Historians often argue over the true role of jesters in court affairs. Some dismiss them as nothing more than distractions and fools, harmless ornaments in a room full of power. Others insist that they were, in fact, essential informants, using wit and charm to uncover truths others could not. Tonight, standing in the center of the Queen's court, surrounded by danger that creeps ever closer, you know which of those two views is true. As the night deepens and shadows grow longer across the ancient stone walls, you steady yourself. The final act is approaching, and your role in it will be more than just laughter and light. You are no longer merely a fool, you are the watchful eye behind the mask, and the storm is almost here. The great hall thrums with a heavy anticipation, a tension so dense it seems to hang in the air like mist. It clings to every breath, every glance, and every sound that dares disturb the charged stillness. Along the vast perimeter, the flickering flames of countless torches dance in their sconces, their golden light licking at the cold stone walls. Shadows twist and curl as though possessed, slithering across the carved pillars and vaulted arches like restless spirits trapped between this world and the next. These walls, weathered by centuries and steeped in memory, have borne witness to the full spectrum of human triumph and tragedy. They have echoed with cries of kings, oaths of fealty, the weeping of widows, and the clashing of steel. And tonight, they listen again, silent, watchful, and unmoved. You stand quietly at the edge of this hallowed space, half shrouded by the ornate bulk of a fluted column carved in ancient stone. Your silver mask, polished to a gleaming brilliance, catches the restless light and reflects it in glimmers that shift with every subtle turn of your head. Beneath that unmoving surface, your eyes scan the hall, keen and alert. Your stance is composed, your body still, but your heart beats with deliberate force, each thud reverberating through your chest like the tolling of a distant bell. You are not merely a performer this night, you are a weapon. This gathering is not the casual revel it pretends to be. It is a staged illusion, a tightly choreographed snare laid with the precision of a master trapper. Beneath the surface of merriment lies a design wrought from suspicion and necessity. Treachery hides here, dressed in velvet and perfumed with lies, and tonight, it will be brought into the light. Around you, the guests cluster in carefully arranged groups, their movements choreographed by etiquette and instinct. Their conversations hum just above a whisper, the tones low, clipped, and guarded. Words flow like smoke, insubstantial and quickly lost, but the weight behind them is palpable. Laughter, when it breaks out, is short and brittle, ringing false in the vaulted chamber. Smiles are practiced and measured, eyes quick to dart away from contact, ever alert for something they cannot quite name. A chill cuts through the air, sharper than the temperature warrants, and none can ignore it. They feel it in their bones, a wrongness, a quiet storm building at the edges of the room. You begin your performance with practiced ease, your limbs moving in fluid arcs. The bright balls you juggle soar in rhythmic loops through the torchlight, their jeweled colors catching the fire as they spin. You are a whirlwind of color and motion, your bells jingling softly as you move from one trick to the next, commanding attention with the effortless grace of a true master of the craft. Your voice rises above the murmurs, quick and clever, weaving tales riddled with puns and veiled jabs. Each line is layered, each jest sharpened by double meanings. The audience laughs, some genuinely, some out of obligation, but you are not watching their mouths, you are watching their eyes. You study the flinches, the narrowed gazes, the half-hidden twitches that betray more than words ever could. Your performance is a code, a secret message hidden in rhythm and rhyme. For those who know the cipher, Lady Aramel and her scattered agents among them, your comedy is a quiet drumbeat of warning. Midway through your routine, a flicker of movement snags your attention. Near the dais, two figures stand in close conference, their heads tilted inward, shoulders hunched in the manner of secrecy. The flickering shadows conceal their faces, but their posture is wrong, too controlled, too calculated. They lean toward one another with the furtiveness of conspirators, not courtiers. Even from a distance, you feel the hairs rise along the back of your neck. Every instinct you've honed in your years of survival and service sharpens into certainty. These are not idle nobles murmuring about fashion or feast. These are predators in disguise. Without breaking your rhythm, you adjust your act. A sweep of your jester's stick draws the crowd's eye away from the dais, but its subtle tilt sends a signal of unmistakable clarity. You angle the stick's carved head, an innocuous flourish to most, but to the trained eyes of Lady Aramel and her stationed loyalists, it speaks volumes. Muscles coil. Eyes narrow. The noose begins to tighten. The hall, once filled with polite murmurs, holds its breath. The shift is almost imperceptible at first. A hush falls like a dropped veil. The musicians falter, the strain of a flute trailing off into silence. Then, swift as a hawk's dive, the guards move. Their formation, once passive, suddenly breaks with precise aggression. They fan out like dark wings through the crowd, weaving between startled guests with unerring purpose. The two cloaked figures flinch, eyes widening in realization. They turn, as if to flee into the press of bodies, but the guards are faster. Their hands seize cloaks and arms with practiced efficiency, wrestling the traitors to stillness before resistance can take root. A gasp ripples outward, cresting in a wave of shocked whispers and disbelieving exclamations. Nobles rise from their chairs, hands clutched to pearls and sword hilts alike, their faces caught somewhere between dread and awe. The deception is laid bare. The trap has sprung. The silence fractures as the web of secrecy unravels before the throne itself. From the far end of the hall, the queen rises. Every movement is regal, every gesture precise. She is draped in midnight velvet stitched with fine silver thread, her presence a beacon amidst the turmoil. Her gaze sweeps the chamber, and when she speaks, her voice cleaves through the din with crystalline command. Justice will be served, she says, and the words ring out like the clang of a bell on a winter morning, sharp, undeniable, absolute. The hall obeys. No one speaks. No one dares. You feel your breath finally catch and release, a long, controlled exhale that seems to pull the tension from your very bones. Weeks, no, months, of subtle planning and silent vigilance fall away in that single breath. The weight that has pressed against your spine with every secret meeting, every coded joke, every masked glance now eases, if only a little. At your feet, Pickle barks once, softly, his tail swaying. The sound is grounding, a tether to something warm and familiar. In this high chamber of intrigue and shadows, his loyalty has been your quiet anchor. The traitors, now stripped of disguise, their faces bared and eyes burning with rage and humiliation, are dragged away. Their elaborate lies crumble into nothing, exposed before those they sought to deceive. Around you, the court begins to breathe again. The murmurs swell once more, louder now, tinged with awe and lingering disbelief. What they have just witnessed is more than justice, it is spectacle, the unveiling of truth through the mask of folly. You recall the old stories, the half-remembered lines from crumbling texts that spoke of jesters as sacred fools. They alone could mock the king, laugh at the lords, and speak truths dressed in absurdity. What others feared to say, they could sing. Beneath their jingling caps lay minds honed sharper than any blade. And tonight, you have wielded your wit like a sword. You have danced through the heart of danger, cloaked in mirth, and delivered justice with a smile. Historians may debate your role, casting jesters as mere buffoons or secret sages. But you know better. You have seen how a joke can mask a warning, how laughter can lead armies and dismantle treachery. In this hall of power and fear, you have become both shield and dagger. The music resumes, tentative at first, then building with confidence. Laughter rises anew, looser, less strained. The spell has broken, the court reclaims its rhythm. Yet in the quiet corners of your mind, you feel the tale has not yet reached its end. There are more layers, more schemes waiting in the wings. The torchlight flickers like a heartbeat, casting new shadows for new secrets, but for tonight, at least, you have prevailed. The court is safer. The danger has passed, if only for now. And in this moment of triumph, with your mask shining and Pickle by your side, you allow yourself a smile behind the silver. The fool has outwitted the liars. And the game is far from over. The days that follow the unraveling of the failed conspiracy stretch out slowly and gently, like a soft, sighing breeze drifting through the castle's ancient, weathered halls. Each hour seems to pass with a kind of tentative grace, the moments no longer gripped by dread or suspicion, but instead unfolding with cautious deliberation. The once oppressive tension that had clenched the court in its unrelenting grasp now begins to loosen. The sharp edges of fear, which had so thoroughly pierced the hearts of courtiers and servants alike, gradually begin to dull. In their place, a hesitant optimism begins to emerge, like the first timid shoots of green after a long, bitter winter. The atmosphere, though still tinged with wariness, lightens just enough to allow a fragile sense of peace to begin settling over the sprawling stone walls and echoing corridors. You walk those familiar passageways with a sense of newfound clarity, your steps measured and purposeful. No longer are you simply the jester who leaps and twirls for amusement, whose colorful garb and painted smile conceal 1,000 overlooked truths. You are something more now. You have become a silent guardian of the court's uneasy harmony, an unseen protector of the delicate balance that sustains the kingdom's fragile order. Beneath the laughter and jest, your eyes remain watchful. Beneath the mask, your mind stays ever vigilant. Pickle, ever your loyal and exuberant companion, bounds ahead with irrepressible glee. His paws patter softly on the smooth flagstones as he darts through patches of sunlight spilling in from high windows. His boundless energy offers a comforting contrast to the quieter burden you carry. You follow him through the quieter corners of the castle, places where shadows cling gently to the walls and whispers often linger in the air. Together, you observe the rhythms of court life resuming with their peculiar blend of elegance and danger. The court dances forward once more, its patterns as complex and intricate as ever, a strange mixture of subtle gamesmanship, whispered ambitions, and rare moments of unguarded joy. One golden afternoon, the queen requests your presence in her private chambers. The room is filled with the scent of fresh parchment and old roses, its walls lined with shelves of ancient texts and delicate ornaments from lands far beyond the sea. She stands near a window, bathed in soft light, her usual stern composure softened in this moment of quiet privacy. When she turns to you, there is warmth in her eyes. A rare and honest gratitude that cuts through the usual layers of regal restraint. Her voice is low, steady, and sincere as she speaks. "You saved us, in your own way," she says, her words heavy with meaning. You offer only a casual shrug, trying to play the part of the unbothered fool, but the pride that swells within you cannot be so easily hidden. It lingers there, glowing quietly beneath your motley, a flame carefully shielded from view. That evening, and in those that follow, you return to your performances. The bells on your cap jingle softly in the flickering candlelight, each chime a familiar note in the melody of courtly life. Your jokes and stories, once a tool for distraction, now seem to serve a higher purpose. The laughter you coax from the gathered nobles feels different than before. It carries a new tone, lighter, less strained, more human. It is as though joy itself has taken root once more, threading its way gently through the cracks left behind by fear and suspicion. In this way, your jests become more than entertainment. They become a subtle form of healing, drawing together the scattered fragments of trust and unity that the court so desperately needs. Here is something worth noting. In times past, jesters were sometimes more than performers. They often became historians of a kind, preserving the truths others dared not record. Through satire, song, and fable, they told stories that official scribes omitted or distorted to suit the powerful. It is possible that your tales, woven with laughter and wit, will outlast the intrigues you have quietly unraveled. Your humor may carry echoes of truth that endure long after the last torch in the hall is extinguished. There remains an ongoing debate among scholars. Were jesters merely pawns of the nobility, toys to be played with and discarded? Or were they, in some strange and subtle way, players in their own right, masters of misdirection and wisdom cloaked in absurdity? In your heart, you suspect the answer lies somewhere in between. Your own journey has been one of balancing mischief with insight, folly with foresight. The lines between truth and jest, shadow and light, have long since blurred. As twilight deepens and the sky outside fades from pale lavender to deep indigo, you return to your chamber. The stone walls around you hum with a gentle stillness, the castle settling into its nightly rhythm. Pickle curls beside you, his small body warm and steady, his breathing soft and even. The rhythmic rise and fall of his chest is a quiet comfort, a reminder that, even in the midst of uncertainty, you are not alone. You lie back, letting the weight of the day fall away piece by piece. A gentle hush fills the room. Outside your window, the wind carries with it the faint rustle of leaves and the far-off hoot of an owl. Within these ancient walls, countless stories have been told, and many more remain unwritten. You close your eyes, and for the first time in what feels like a long while, a gentle, fragile hope takes root in your chest. It is a small thing, but it is real. The tale of the court continues, its path winding and unknown. But for now, in this quiet hour, you allow yourself to rest. Wind down, the evening settles around you gently, like a warm, comforting blanket folding in soft, undulating waves that embrace the castle and all within it. The distant sounds of footsteps, murmured conversations, and the faint clatter of armor gradually fade into a mere whisper, leaving behind only the quiet, steady rhythm of your own breath. Beside you, Pickle shifts slightly, the soft rustle of his fur brushing against your side creating a soothing, familiar presence. You feel the worries and burdens of the day begin to loosen their grip, slipping away like shadows chased by dawn. In their place rises a peaceful calm that wraps around your mind like a gentle, creeping fog, softening every thought and tension until all that remains is stillness. You recall the flickering torchlight dancing upon the cold, rough stone walls of the great hall, the subtle clink of the tiny bells sewn onto your jester's hat, and the laughter that echoed through the corridors, laughter that carried within it whispered warnings and hidden truths. These images linger in your mind like a gentle melody, soft and comforting, much like the last tender note of a lullaby sung long ago to soothe a restless child. there is no need to hurry or rush. No pressing urgency weighs down on your chest tonight. The shadows around the castle are quiet for now, the dangers and threats kept firmly at bay by the sharp edge of courage and the careful dance of wit. You have journeyed down a path tangled with secrets and peril, but this moment invites you to release your hold and let your thoughts wander freely, unburdened. You close your eyes and feel the softness of your bed beneath you, the coolness of the night air brushing gently against your skin like a whispered caress. You allow the stories of the day to settle inside your mind slowly and peacefully, much like dust that quietly drifts down and rests on the pages of ancient tomes, patiently waiting for another day when they will be opened once more and brought back to life. Sleep arrives quietly, like a gentle friend who wraps you tenderly in its protective embrace. The secrets of the court also find their rest, tucked safely beneath the vast canopy of stars and watched over by the serene, steady gaze of the moon. Good night, and may your dreams be sweet and untroubled.